Okay, we're calling to order the special call meeting for the Signal Mountain Town Council for July 20th, 2021. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we'll have a short invocation. Okay. Carol, can you do the roll call, please?
Vice Mayor Suzanne Murdoch.
Here.
Councilmember Vicki Anderson.
Here.
Councilmember Andrew Gardner.
Here.
Councilmember Dan Lang.
Over here.
Mayor Charles Voss.
Here. We don't have any minutes to approve. Do we have anyone that's here that wants to address the council? Okay. We don't have any resolutions or ordinances, so we will go straight to the presentation by Steve Thompson from Burris, Thompson and Associates.
If you guys wouldn't mind kind of spinning around, he'll be at the podium.
Okay.
Okay. Hi. Good evening. Glad to be here. I'm going to go through this handout we have that summarizes the methodology, findings, and recommendations of the PACE study. I still consider this to be a bit of a work in progress, but we need some feedback from you folks as far as where we're headed. I think we're pretty close to, finalizing everything, but whenever I do a lot of these and find that things get changed right up until the very last minute before the checks go out. So, but we're pretty close. So just a couple words about me, just so you kind of know who we are. Burris, Thompson Associates. There's two of us right now. So we're a small independent HR consulting firm in Middle Tennessee. Right now, 100% of our work is city and county government. I grew up in the private sector, so to speak. I was director of comp and benefits for Dollar General Corporation. And then in 1994, went back into the consulting thing, and I've been doing that ever since. Initially had mostly for-profit clients, but by hook or crook over the years, word of mouth, advertising, whatever, we become known as specialists in the public sector in Tennessee. So that comprises most of our work these days. So we know Tennessee wage and salaries pretty well. That being said, so I'm going to go through this, try to make it as clear as I can and take time to explain things clearly. If you have any questions, it's probably best that you ask them right away rather than try to keep them for the end. You might forget. And if I plan on answering some of the questions later on in the presentation, I'll let you know. But I'd encourage you to go ahead and ask questions as we go. So keep this pretty informal. So if you look at the handout, I'll just kind of go through it briefly here. The study objective is pretty straightforward. One of the key things that we always look at when we do this is to make sure employees are being paid for the work that's being performed. Many times in the public sector, because of headcount control and other things related to that, budget kinds of things, that positions get approved and you can't vary from that. And so departments have this work that has to be done. They have to give it to somebody, and so they give it to people. And so over a period of years, sometimes jobs have evolved much beyond where they were originally, and what's being performed is quite a bit different than what the person was hired for. Maybe you're taking advantage of a particular person's individual skills or strengths or aptitudes or wishes, whatever. And so the job has evolved, and sometimes when I do this, I'm surprised that a job is titled XYZ and they're doing a whole lot more. So that's one of the key things, is to make sure that people are being paid for the work that's being performed. Secondly, we want to make sure that we're competitive going forward, and that's where the benchmark analysis comes in. This is pretty much a market-driven approach. Jobs are valued like they're valued in the marketplace. So we don't do the, some HR compensation manager kinds of things. Yeah, you do some, what's called a job content evaluation of jobs, and you assign points for know-how and problem solving and accountability and working conditions and array jobs from high to low based on those points, and you overlay that against the data, market data, and come up with some sort of pay structure for all the jobs. I've done those. They're kind of fun, but they are a lot of work, kind of hard to maintain. It's kind of a black box sort of effect. All this stuff is employees don't understand, supervisors kind of don't understand what's going on back there. And so I find, and I think this is the trend that we're seeing in the private sector as well as the public sector, is get away from that and go more towards a market-driven approach. It's easier to hang your hat on the data from various surveys or whatever. And there's still some subjectivity in terms of how we match the town's jobs to the jobs in the different databases, but I can kind of defend that and use the same methodology across the whole town. So I think it's less subjective than these job evaluation approaches. So it's market driven. And then of course we have to pay attention to budgetary constraints, and you probably tell us where we are with that, but we came up with, if my mission is to come up with a pay plan recommendation that would position you appropriately and in a competitive posture for going forward, this would be it. Now we can, we can add to it or subtract to it as you see fit, but this is my best shot for accomplishing that objective. All right, so the first thing we did is looked at all the job descriptions, interviewed all the department heads, had them go through their organization, try to get a feel for how the work is organized. We talked about each of the jobs, the scope of the work being performed, job requirements in terms of qualifications. So that in combination with the job descriptions, I feel pretty confident. I understood how each of the jobs are configured here at Signal Mountain. The smaller you get, the more we find that jobs wear multiple hats. So whereas in Williamson County, you might have 3 people all specializing in certain aspects of accounting or codes enforcement or whatever it is, here you might have one person doing all 3 things. So we have to kind of make sure we take that into account. So we're not just matching job titles, we're really trying to match job functions as they're being performed here and trying to match that to the market data. All right, so in terms of the market data, we have two databases, if you will. You'll see in the middle of the page there, the public sector data. We have 15 cities, counties, and a public utility thrown in there that we think, and worked with Boyd on this, to come up with a set of benchmarks, public sector benchmarks that we felt were pretty representative of the market faced by you folks in terms of the labor market. So there are some direct competitors here, the Chattanoogas, Hamilton County, obviously larger organizations, bigger tax base and all that, but hey, as you all know, they're direct labor market competitors, so we can't ignore them. But we've got others in here that may be a little bit further away, but share some of the same demographics as Signal Mountain and seem to be good benchmarks in that regard. And then we have some that are kind of in between East Ridge and Saudi Daisy, Red Bank, and et cetera. So that's how we came up with those set of benchmarks. These are the population numbers there. I'll get back to that in a second. So then the second database we have is a general business and industry database, all employers in that. It's updated quarterly. There's 4,000 job titles. Some are kind of duplicates. But anyway, there's probably 2,500 unique jobs in that database. So I can match pretty much every town job to that database as well. In some cases, more than one job in that private sector database. So for most jobs, then we'll have 2 numbers, a public sector number that represents the average of the job incumbents in that job, and then we'll have a private sector number, general business and industry, and we'll have a number that represents the average from that group. We'll average those 2 numbers together, come up with a market rate for the job. This would be for the job, not necessarily the person. And we're not trying to move everybody to the market rate. That's not the intent of the study. I mean, if you have money to do that, I guess we could, but usually that's pretty expensive and probably inappropriate anyway for a person who's been hired 2 months ago. They're not fully functioning at that market level anyway, so it's probably not appropriate to pay them at that rate. So most employers will hire new hires with the minimal qualifications. They'll hire them in at somewhere about between 85 and 95% of that market rate. Or if they have, pay scale, they have a midpoint or whatever. So 85 to 95% of that market rate, somewhere in that range. And then most employers will allow pay to progress beyond the market rate as much as market rate plus 20%. This is a pretty traditional pay structure design. Every job has its limits in terms of its value to the taxpayers, and so everybody draws the line somewhere. All right, so all data were projected to July 1, 2021. So it's, I consider that a pretty conservative planning date. Sometimes when I do these, we project it to the next year, July 1, 2022 in this case. But we chose a pretty conservative number here. The only other thing I will say with that is, and with the public sector data for department head level jobs, I did look at the relationship between pay and population. So population is probably the best proxy we have for how difficult department head level and maybe some senior level professional level jobs are. Population is the best proxy we have for the complexity, the scope of those jobs. So yes.
So Steve, you said to ask you to expand. I think that would be a good one. I'd like to hear more about what you look at when you're looking at that relationship.
Yeah, so and I actually have an example here I can pass around. I only have 3 copies, but I'll go ahead and kind of share it with yourselves. So this is the graphic representation of that analysis. It's a regression analysis of population and salary.
Okay.
This relationship was pretty strong, and you can see as we plot the salaries and population, they kind of line up in a pretty straight line. It's a pretty strong relationship. This was kind of unique. Most of the other department heads, the relationship was either non-existent, the dots are almost random, for this set of public sector benchmarks, or there's a very, not a very strong relationship. So, where there was a strong relationship, I used the number off this analysis. We can plug in the population for Signal Mountain in this formula based on this analysis, and it will tell you what the predicted salary would be for a town with that population of Signal Mountain. So you could look at the bottom axis there, find the population of Signal Mountain, go straight up to that line, and that would be where the, what this analysis would tell, that would be the market rate for the job based on the population of Signal Mountain. So I used that number where it made sense. Like I said, and sometimes when I did this with, there was no strong relationship between population and
You said it was
salary. Yeah, there wasn't any population. For some of the department heads, there wasn't any relationship between population. Yeah. So if you look at a chart for a couple of these, it was just a random array of dots across the page. So you couldn't really draw a line. And if you did, it was pretty much a guess. So I did that for the department head level positions. You'll notice there that for Pigeon Forge, I have an asterisk behind 30,000. If you look at the census data for Pigeon Forge, the population is not 30,000. I just did a pay study for Pigeon Forge. We ended up, finished that up a couple months ago. And so one of the questions they have is, well, Steve, you drive through Pigeon Forge, we do not look like a town of 6,000 people. We've got 60,000 people here any day. So in terms of the infrastructure, law enforcement, it's not a typical, I think their population is like 6,800 or something. So we said, well, so I came up with, I don't know how scientific this was, but we hit upon 30,000. So when I did this analysis for them, I plugged in population of 30,000 for Pigeon Forge. So that's why you see the asterisks there. I just thought
Are there any also ties, is there anything similar to this, to the town's overall budget?
Probably is. I haven't done that. MTS probably has that available if you wanna touch base with them. I'm sure they've got that analysis in their pocket somewhere.
That's not something you asked them what.
No, I mean, we can do it if I could do that pretty easily, but I didn't. So I was strictly looking at salaries, base pay, and relationship to population. So sometimes when I do these studies, all the department heads have a pretty strong relationship between salary and population. I mean, it's not perfect, but population might explain 40, 50, 60% of the variance in pay, which is pretty good when it comes to this kind of analysis.
Why? Why is that good?
Well, whenever you do this kind of a thing, as you can guess, if we were to plot, let's take 100 cities in Tennessee and plot population and finance director pay. It's not going to be on a straight line, which would be 100%. It's just not. So there's going to be some variation based on qualifications of the incumbent, how tenure of the incumbent, all sorts of things. So the large numbers will give you a pretty strong
General brilliance of the incumbent.
Yeah, exactly. So whenever you do an analysis of phenomena like that, it very rarely gets above, in the world of salary analysis, very rarely gets above 70%. Okay. If you're explaining 40 to 50% of the variance, you're doing pretty good. Now, some of these equations for you folks, it was like 5% of the variance was related to salary, to population, and the rest was other stuff. So I couldn't really hang my head on that number. So I just used the average from the public sector group, which seemed to be the best number. Now, I should point out, I did not use department head numbers for Hamilton County or Chattanooga because of the scope of those jobs is way beyond what you have here. So I typically did not use the average for what would be considered comparable jobs to your department heads in Hamilton County or Chattanooga.
Is there any sort of, and I'm asking some of these questions because I sat through this once before and I'm thinking of things that I wish I'd asked last time.
Okay, sure.
And if you don't have enough, that's fine, but is there any sort of a bleed ratio correlation where you can tell what departments are losing? You guys, is that part of your scope at all? What departments are having turnover rate?
Oh, yeah, no, so we did not look at that.
Okay.
When we talked to the individual department heads, we got that information, in terms of, we're having a tough time recruiting and keeping these kinds of people. I made note of that. And in some cases, maybe quite a few cases, your pay rates were pretty low relative to market and could explain some of that. Now, as you know, anytime somebody leaves one job to go to another, pay is not always the main reason. Right. It's often the excuse, frankly, but supervisory relationships, quality of supervision is probably the most important aspect. Working conditions and hours and those kinds of things come in play. So pay is up there, but it's not always the number one thing. Here we're just focusing on pay here, but there may be other issues related to recruitment and retention.
Did you factor in, is there a way to factor the David versus Goliath kind of aspect of a smaller town next to a larger town, where you've got bigger, deeper pockets?
So the short answer is no. So below the department head level, especially non-exempt jobs, the difference between you and Chattanooga is you'll have 2 of them, they'll have 60. So the work there's more of it, but they have more people doing it. The higher you get up in the hierarchy of the organization, of course, that relationship goes away. The department head for Parks and Rec in Chattanooga may have 150 people. I don't know how many they've got. So they're responsible for the whole thing. So that population is a good proxy for the complexity of that job, whereas for the people doing the work, not so much, because you just hire more of those people. Now, as you in between there, that relationship it varies, but typically the higher up you go, the more the job complexity is defined by population, square miles, other factors. But in the trenches, it's the work itself, whether it's here, Chattanooga, Red Bank, Saudi Daisy, it's the same. It's just one will have more of them than the other.
Thank you.
Other questions so far?
Yeah. Do I probably need to pull this over?
Oh, okay.
We're going to pull it right up to you.
So I guess as you're assessing this through this framework for department heads and through using kind of averages, you're looking at a job description and the skills required for that, and
Right.
but how do we adjust for, or do we, the person in that job?
Okay, so at this point, we don't.
Yeah.
So at this point, we're just talking the jobs, trying to look at the job functions, what's the value of that set of job functions and their qualifications to the taxpayers, and that's what we're trying to do here, set that value and the pay opportunity for that job, within which we would manage, within that which we would manage, what you're talking about,
Yeah.
differences in incumbent qualifications and background and skills and those kinds of things. So we'll kind of get to that in a minute here.
Okay.
All right.
I got some other questions.
Okay. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I guess, how did the private data impact these averages?
So typically a little bit higher. The private sector typically pays a little bit higher for the same kind of work. In some cases, the difference is not huge. Some jobs in city government, you really don't have direct counterparts in the private sector. So let's say Parks and Rec, program coordinator in Parks and Rec, for example, or somebody's doing programming in parks. You don't really have something like that. Maybe in a gym facility, like a Gold's Gym, or, you might have something kind of like that, personal trainer, but it's really not comparable.
Yeah.
So in that case, the data from the public sector may be pretty much similar to what we can match to in the private.
Yeah.
There's a recreational supervisor in that private sector database that kind of matches program coordinator in Parks and Rec, but the numbers are pretty close.
So I guess I would have some caution with that, because since we are isolating salary,
Right.
Typically, I could be wrong, but typically public benefits are going to be more valuable and higher than a private sector job, and so that's part of the trade-off. So if private's coming in higher on salary, that also might be because there's no pension. There's probably not as good of health benefits. I mean, generally speaking.
Maybe, yeah. I guess I'd caution you and come to that conclusion. That definitely used to be true 20 years ago. It was, black and white difference. What we're finding, though, is that difference has narrowed considerably. The pension difference is still kind of there, but, TACRS has got this hybrid plan, and they got the defined contribution plan, so some cities are dumping the pension side, and they're grandfathering those people. All the new folks are coming in under the DC plan.
True, but we have it.
Yeah. So, that's kind of what's happening in many jurisdictions. But just look at healthcare. It used to be, healthcare was a pretty big differentiator there between the private and public sector. That's pretty much gone away in many cases. So we did not really look at benefits per se, and we do that sometimes when we do these studies. And I'll tell you what, the elected officials, hey, we're spending all these dollars on benefits, it's got to be worth something. Let's look. And so I do this analysis.
From a guy choosing a job standpoint, it's often, people don't look at it that hard, and they're still, that's
so
$2 more.
So for your, some lower, I hate to use the word lower level, but, people in the trenches doing the work, hey, they don't care about pension, they don't care about benefits until they get married and have a family. So before then, they don't care. So they'll go across the street for 15 cents an hour. So there's that. And then, like I say, we do these analyses sometimes in conjunction with a pay study like this, and we look at both comparisons to the private sector and the public sector. And what we find is that the city county benefits packages are pretty comparable nowadays. They have some strengths that the private sector doesn't have, but they have some weaknesses too that the private sector may take care of. So,
And on the same topic, how would you compare
yeah,
police and fire
Yeah.
to the private sector?
yeah. So
You can't, yeah.
but that's a good point. I mean, I think you have to look at each jurisdiction is different. I've got a couple of clients. Their employees don't pay a dime for healthcare, individual or family coverage. We targeted below average in salaries in that case because they were spending so much money, probably in an unsustainable way, by the way, doing that. But that's kind of, but most cities have gotten away from that, and they're charging, there's some that have a cost containment strategy, which is legit. We're going to keep all the dependents off our health plan. We just want the employees covered. So we're going to have the family coverage price way up there. So nobody's going to take the family coverage. We're going to control our costs, our benefits costs, by having just coverage for the employees. That's a cost containment strategy. Probably a problem when it comes to recruitment and retention. But we've got some clients, I've got some cities that have taken that approach to save money on the dollars on the health insurance side. Hey, we're just going to cover our employees. We're going to offer it to everybody, but they're going to pay for it if they want it. There's others that don't obviously take that approach and try to be fair and whether you're individual or single parent or large family, the city or county is going to cover whatever percentage of the premium, regardless of what that is. So the percentage is the same across the board. So yeah,
I would be interested in seeing the two averages as well as just the one market that we have, average of the two, right? The public and the private. Just, I don't, it's not got in the weeds of comparing benefits, just to see what the impact is. Maybe they're not that different.
And usually when there's a huge difference, that's a red flag for me that I'm not matching the job in one or the other, or maybe both. So if there's a huge difference, maybe I've got the job slotted or benchmarked too low in that database, or maybe too high in the other one, or vice versa. So I usually try to look at that and make sure I'm looking at the jobs appropriately. There's some subjectivity in how you match these jobs to the database, and we do a lot of this work, so we're pretty comfortable with what we come up with, but there's still some subjectivity. So if we ever see that situation, that's a red flag, and we try to go back and make sure, maybe we gave this job too much credit in the private sector database, and we kind of match it. So we'll get back into the job description. Sometimes we'll call the department head and say, hey, I'm having a tough time matching this job. Can you help me out with this? So we do try to, we're sensitive to that there is a huge discrepancy. Sometimes that's a problem. And on the other hand, to somebody else's comment, that's the labor market, so part of whenever I do these in front of elected officials, if you ask me what the labor market is, you can't say we're not going to pay attention to X, Y, Z because they're bigger, have more taxes. They're going to steal our people anyway, so it doesn't matter. And to the employee, they don't care. They're going to go to where the job matches their expectations for work, supervision, and pay. So, so from an employee standpoint, that's almost irrelevant. And so what I'm trying to do here, and what we try to do is, we're walking a fine line between satisfying the need of management and supervisors to attract and retain quality folks to serve the citizens, and the desire of employees to make as much as they can, and the concerns of the taxpayers who want to only pay what's reasonable. Hopefully what's reasonable. Sometimes it's not even that. But anyway, so we have to kind of walk the fine line there. And so the approach we take, I think does that. I do some in Middle Tennessee, you've got Franklin and Brentwood that are intentionally above market payers. They don't target the average, they target way above the average. So we kind of have to look at that a little bit when we're dealing with Laverne or Lebanon or Springfield or somebody like that. But nevertheless, that's who they're competing with. So they can't just ignore that like it doesn't exist. And if you talk to the department heads, they'll say, hey, I don't care about that. I want to know what Brentwood and Franklin are paying. So, and here, what's Collegedale paying? What's Signal Mountain paying? We want to look at that. So, so I think the approach we take is to look at the work being performed, match it to this collection of benchmarks, recognizing there's some that are bigger, some that may be a little bit more high paying than others, but on the other hand, you got some that are kind of low paying. So it comes out in the wash, I guess is what I say.
So in your opinion, are our benefits comparable to the average private sector job you were comparing to?
Comparable to the public sector, I think pretty comparable. Most people cited benefits as a strength, but not necessarily a weakness, I don't think. So in comparison to the private sector, I didn't go through that because it wasn't part of the scope of the study.
Yeah.
You can do that.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
fine.
fine.
For it, but and most of the time, like I say, people are so oriented towards the base pay rate anyway that I know Metro Nashville 10 years ago they hired one big consulting firms to do a big fancy study. They came up with some analysis looking at the benefits and came up with a dollar figure for each employee to a dollar figure in the marketplace. And I thought it was all smoke and mirrors. And I think but the end result was they didn't push salaries as much as where they should have. Yeah. I think they're kind of playing catch up now.
You got to kind of discount any kind of difference there.
You have to be careful. So,
I
don't know.
Okay.
To answer your question, I guess I've been kind of a long-winded answer.
That's okay.
Yeah. Okay.
And so in the objectives, you say comply with budgetary restraints. What restraints were we working under on this?
So, in talking with Boyd and Sam, we came up with what we thought would be reasonable, and taking into account what we know is kind of going on locally with other employers as far as pay increase budgets. We're coming out of this pandemic thing. A lot of employers are going, whoa, wait a minute. We're having trouble attracting and keeping people. It's everywhere. Mm-hmm. Maybe a little bit is related to this unemployment stuff. But I'll tell you what, I think there's some information out that employees are quitting jobs at a historically high rate because there's so many jobs out there they can pick and choose. So what's happening is the jobs at the lower level that are trying to get by with $8, $9, $10 an hour, it just can't do it because people are, I can go over here and get this job. Maybe it's an easier job, frankly, and I can get paid more. So there's a lot of that going on, and I think we came up with something that seemed to be reasonable.
Steve, if I may, on the front end, and correct me if I'm misspeak, but on the front end, when that question was posed, my, for lack of a better term, direction was what we need to know is where we need to be competitive, not constrained by, well, we can afford this, or,
right.
Take out all the stops. Just tell us what we need to do to be strong in the competitive market in our area. And then as it developed, we started looking at, what needed to be done. Yeah. And that's
probably not quite accurate to say pull out all the stops. But, we kind of approached it that, hey, what do we need to do to be reasonably, that will position the city, the town going forward in a pretty strong competitive position.
That's what I'm saying. I didn't say pull out all the stops.
Right.
We need a solid, realistic.
Right.
Well, we know, this is.
Yeah. So I usually, I'm trying to walk that fine line, between the taxpayers' concerns. So I usually try to figure out what can we really put out there that moves us forward and isn't so unreasonable that it's going to be dismissed out of hand. If I'm in front of the BOMA or the county commissioners and I'm saying, hey, we're gonna spend 20% of payroll to get you to be competitive, that's not gonna fly, even if it's right, it's not gonna fly. So, so we have to kind of balance with what's reasonable and what needs to be done to really position you appropriately. So I think to Boyd's comment, we kind of erred on the side of, here's what we think we need to do to get us at the right place. And, you know, you all, I guess, are gonna have to tell us if we're over the bounds when it comes to budget. So anyway, anything else? Okay, so we have to do, you know, we come up with a market rate for each job, which, by the way, typically represents an incumbent with 5 to 7 years of experience in the job. That's the market rate. I did compare that market rate, if you look at section D under findings, on that first page of that handout, the structure market index. You currently have a pay scale that has what's called a market rate. And I guess, Boyd, that is a 3-year number, or?
Depending on how they're hired in.
Yeah.
2 to 3.
2 to 3 years.
Maybe as little as 1.
Yeah. So I compared the market rates I determined from the databases, from the data, to your current market rate for each job, and calculated a structure index. That's what's under D1 here on this first page. The overall average structure index was 86%. So the market rates, as determined from the survey data, were about 14% above, on the average, above the town's current market rates for the job. And this varies. Half the indexes were between 80 and 90%. So a quarter were above 90%, a quarter were below 80%. So it does vary by department, by job. But overall average, your current pay structure market rates, this number was about 86% of the market rates for the jobs determined from the database.
I want to make sure I understand this versus the next.
Yeah, this is a pay structure. Okay, it's not the employee salaries yet. We're just talking about the market rates.
So this is the, when you say the current town of Signal Mountain market.
Market rate. That's the
market rate. So that is the average of the two.
No, so the town has a pay scale comprised of, boy, there's 3 numbers, right?
Can I say something?
Sure.
To make you feel better? The terminology they use is from Mars.
Okay.
Well, I want to make sure I understand it.
Yeah.
It took me a while. You recall, I asked 100 questions in the first year or two to try to get an understanding of what they mean when they say market. And it helps to say market rate every time.
Okay.
Because that's what it's talking about. But then there are market rates for
This is
people,
what we
and
looked at a
market
couple
rates
years
for,
ago.
for people who come in.
Yeah, so this market rate I'm referring to here, the town market rate, is what's on that piece of paper in front of you.
Thanks.
That we just handed out.
Okay.
Yeah, on our market, we see is minimum P1, P2, and then market. That's what would compare to step 6 in this plan.
We'll get to that in a minute.
So that's our current definition before the study.
Right.
Okay, that's
Compared to the market rates. We
Got
haven't developed the steps yet, but.
versus the
so-
market rates
so
from
I'm
the study.
comparing that
which is
market number on there
6.
for each job to the market
Got
rate from the data for the job.
Okay.
And on average, these are 14% below
Right.
where you think they
Right,
would be.
right. So forget about the exact numbers. What that tells me is your current pay structure, the numbers on that piece
These
of
are
paper
2%.
are kind of low.
Yeah.
Below where they probably should be to be competitive. We'd like them to be at 100%. So, we'll get back to the structure in a minute. So the next thing under number D2 here, the salary market index, same analysis. This time it took the employee's current salary and divided it by the market rate for the job. Okay, so now we're actually looking at the employees' pay rates themselves. And same analysis. Your current employee salaries are about 89% of the market rates for the job. Now remember, this market rate represents somebody with 5 to 7 years in the position. So if you've got a brand new recruit in the police department or new hire in public works, their pay probably is appropriately at somewhere between 85 and 90% of market. That's fine. That's what most employers do. They're hiring people below the market rate. They don't even know where the bathrooms are the first day. They're not real productive. And so it takes a while to get up to speed. Some departments it's longer than others. But so people ask me, well, what should that salary market index be? And the answer is it depends. So if you had a very mature organization, the only way you lost people was through retirement, and you hired replacements, over time, that market, that's employee salary index would probably be at 105, 110% or more. That'd be okay. On the other hand, if you're a very fast-growing organization, maybe not that old in terms of, corporate America, whatever, so a lot of your people have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 years tenure, that salary index is going to be 90% somewhere, or 95 maybe. Depends on your mix of tenure. So, so what that does tell me, though, is that overall your salaries are kind of low, and I guess what's most concerning is that 1/4 of the employee salaries are below 80% of the market rates. That to me is the big problem.
Right. Can I ask
unless they were hired yesterday, I mean that's too low.
Right. So I want to get back to that one in a second, but I want to make sure that I'm understanding something properly. The 84 is up market. The 14% below is up market on this.
That's the jobs.
Right.
That's the jobs.
Our minimums, P1s and P2s, as far as people coming in, do we have any idea where those compare to other similar institutions with people coming in?
The short answer is no, because how you define P1, well, P1, you could probably do an analysis on that. Okay. P2, probably not. Yeah, what would be the comparable P2 in Red Bank or Chattanooga?
How about our minimum?
You could do that. The problem I have looking at the pay scale, so the approach we've taken, as you know, is we look at what people are actually being paid, not the pay structure of the various cities. What I find is that if you take a group of 15 cities and look at their pay structures, their set of pay grades and ranges or pay steps, you'll find some that put this in place 10 years ago. They haven't used step 1 or the range minimum for 10 years. So if you pull that number off, it's bogus. On the other hand, so they may have all their people actually being paid at the max because they haven't adjusted the pay scale for so many years. On the other hand, maybe I did a pay study for them last year and we're doing the same thing, and everybody's actual pay is around 90% of market, and so their pay range minimum is probably meaningful, but
how often
I prefer to know. You tell me what people are actually being paid. I don't care what the max is, which is, by the way, pure fiction. We don't know what's going to happen between now and 10 years. Who knows where that max is going to be? Structures are typically adjusted every once in a while. The minimum is a real job, a real number, right? Especially for public safety, entry level, clerical, accounting. You kind of hire at at that minimum. But for many departments, if you have 5 or 6 people, you may very rarely use step 1, the pay range minimum. You're going to hire people based on their qualifications and experience. You typically bring them in somewhere above the minimum and below the midpoint somewhere. So it's kind of hard to compare pay structures like that. I much prefer.
That helps.
Yeah,
I understand what you're saying.
Tell me what people are actually being paid. That's what I want to know. I don't care what you say you're going to pay them 10 years from now, because who knows if that's true. And the minimum, are you really using that minimum?
Sure. All right. So to the prior point of the 82%,
mm-hmm.
Where does that fall within the different positions from folks who are starting at the bottom or towards the top? Where does that fall within the overall scale, or is it just distributed?
It probably tends to gravitate towards the lower level jobs, entry level kinds of positions. When we talked to the department heads, and a lot of them said, hey, our starting rates of pay are just too low. So we bring people in, we train them, and they go somewhere else. And I'm not surprised when we actually run the analysis that, these low indexes, salary indexes, were overrepresented by lower level, entry level positions. But it's not strictly those. There's some other positions too that the current incumbent is probably a little bit underpaid based on what they're doing.
Can I ask a question,
Yes.
please? So you mentioned a second ago that the salary rates maybe hadn't been adjusted. You were using an example of somebody who maybe didn't adjust their salaries for 10 years, then it's not
Well,
relevant.
they didn't adjust their scales. They adjusted
Well, no,
salaries.
I know. So the scale,
Scales, yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
I guess my question is, how often should a healthy organization adjust their pay scales
Right.
in order to
Okay.
stay relevant? Because
Yeah.
I mean, I remember going through this exercise a couple of years ago to try to bring us,
Right.
you know, a little bit more current because we were so far behind the 8 ball. And, you know, I think it helped, but clearly not enough. So how often do we need to be going through this exercise?
So you don't have to go through this exact same exercise, but I usually tell my clients that you probably need to look at the pay structure itself, the pay steps or ranges, and adjust them every 2 or 3 years at most. So the market right now is moving around 2.5% maybe. If you look at salaries for a particular job over time, people come, people go in that position, but you know, pay usually is there's wage inflation, if you will, of around 2.5%, somewhere in that range. So if you don't adjust your pay scales once in a while, you're going to start falling behind. So that starting rate, that pay range minimum or step one is going to start to lag what everybody else is doing, and you're going to have trouble. So I usually tell people, you know, every 2 or 3 years, what you need to do is you don't need to hire me. Some do. And we don't need to do it as an elaborate thing, but you know, if you were to hire me, what I would do is, hey, let's pick a subset of 15 jobs, do the same sort of analysis, pull the numbers and compare it to what we now are proposing here to be the pay range midpoints and see where you are. Do you need to adjust the scales or not? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But that sort of benchmark analysis probably should be done every 2 or 3 years. You can look at published data. The major consulting firms put out surveys. You know, this year employers are moving their employee salaries an average of 3.2%. They're moving their pay ranges 2.7%. That data is pretty readily available. If you want to just look at that, you can do that, or some combination. But yeah, I think every 2 or 3 years, frankly, would be appropriate.
You talked about our salary market index is 89% of the market rate. And you mentioned you might have a mature organization that's over 100%,
Right.
and then another organization that's, I don't know how you described it, but might be at 95%. What would be a target? Is there a target? Is it 100% or is it something other than 100%?
I would say it's probably not 100%. You know, kind of, it varies. It depends on your mix of tenure. If you've got a lot of brand new people that have been in the job less than 2 years, you know, if your average is 85, 90%, you're probably okay. But if you've got 15-year people at that rate compared to the market, that's a problem. It's kind of, I get the question on what should this number be, and it's kind of hard to answer. So when we do this study, we kind of come at it, you know, if we're going to set up this new pay scale with a range minimum or step one, everybody needs to be at least at that range, at that minimum or step one. If not, they should be adjusted to that. Above and beyond that, it becomes a budget thing, how much you want to link pay to tenure and position. We sometimes do pretty elaborate analysis where we do that. If you have, it's often a phase 2 thing. We'll do this first, and then I think we mentioned this in the personnel committee meeting, maybe phase 2 would be, now that we got this as a starting point, let's look at, in more depth, the relationship between incumbent time and job and their salary, their position in this pay range. Maybe that's where we factor in some other things, master's degrees or extraneous experience, whatever else that maybe was not captured in this analysis because we're just trying to get a plan in place and get everybody in the plan, so to speak. So that can sometimes is a phase 2 analysis, and if you have the money, you can adjust pay to closer, maybe not exactly to, but closer to where it, quote unquote, should be based on the person's tenure in position. Maybe your overall tenure with the town, if you want to factor that in. Maybe you factor in the prior experience somehow. You know, so the more you do that,
So Steve,
you can do that. Yes.
and you may not be able to say this because it may be proprietary to the towns that you work with, but for instance, if you did work with a Franklin, Tennessee, and found that their goal was 105, and they have a reason for it to be 105, do they see better retention, and does perhaps by being at the other end of this save them money overall? So I'm guessing, is it something they're choosing to do because they can, or because they feel they should, or maybe something else?
It's a combination of both. They probably can, because they've got the tax base to do it. Although, I did the city of Belmead. I don't know if you've been to Belmead. The employees are complaining about those horses on the corner of Belmead and West End because they have a statue of some horses. They spend all these thousands of dollars. And I get in there, they're really underpaid. All this money in this community, per capita income is, $400,000. It's so ridiculous. And they were paying these people pretty poorly. I was shocked. So, sometimes the correlation between the money and what they're actually doing isn't there. But anyway, I think in the case of I do happen to do Franklin, they value quality service to their citizens, so they want to hire the best people possible. To do that, they felt they had to be an above-market payer. So it's a combination. They can do that. They have the financial resources to do that. Plus, it also is consistent with their strategic vision for the city and how it serves citizens, quality of life, all that stuff. So, they made that choice to be an above-average payer. And does it help with retention? Yeah, I think so. But hey, they're having a problem right now with sanitation drivers and maintenance workers in the parks department and building maintenance people. Heavy equipment operators, they're having the same issues everybody is. So it hasn't solved the problem completely. So now, a lot of cities are looking at, and we're probably gonna see more of this come out, it used to be called that working wage kind of thing. We're gonna have a floor of $10 an hour. Now it's more like $15 an hour. Nobody's gonna be paid less than $15 an hour in the town, and we're gonna adjust our pay scales accordingly. We're seeing some of that in response to this current difficulty in recruiting and retention. So even the high payers are having problems at the bottom end attracting people. They're probably better off in terms of the professional level folks and supervisors and managers. Department heads are not losing those people to the competition because they're paid pretty well.
If I might, before we get too far away from this point of clarification, you're talking about some people's scales, minimum really isn't minimum. You've grown past that, you don't actually use it. Our minimum on our current pay plan is our minimum. Yeah. So it relates to step one on the proposed plan. And how they relate differs from job to job. Some, they're closer than others. Just as an example, laborer in this plan, minimum's 13, step one's 1372. We're at 1213. So higher, but not a great deal. You get into the ones like heavy equipment operator, it goes from $1,502 to $1,980. That's the difference between our minimum and the new minimum. So it really is job specific. So it's not just kind of a wholesale, we're going up this much. So I think we want to make sure we understand that minimum, if we hire somebody in and they're qualified, but we don't have any experience, that's where we're going to start. If they're a police officer that's not certified or a firefighter that hasn't been through the academy, that's where they're going to start. So it is as far as step one and our minimum, it is an apples to apples.
So let me kind of go through the recommendations here that kind of bring some of this discussion back together here. So if you look at the bottom there, section E on that first page, the recommendations, we're proposing, if you look at attachment 1, third page in, where we see this set of pay grades and steps. This is the pay structure we're proposing.
Before we get into that, can I ask a couple of things?
Sure.
Along the lines of what Susanna was asking, because I think that's important. I just want to make sure I understand your recommendation of like that 2 or 3 year review. That's like taking kind of a, not as in depth, but a look at grades and steps.
Yeah, so what?
So, but year to year, to stay competitive, we should still be taking probably these whole structures and doing a cost of living increase, correct?
Could. So we're kind of jumping around. Well, let me answer that question. Then
Yeah. Okay.
Can I say one
Sure,
question
sure.
too? One thing I'm not sure about in this presentation that maybe it just has to do with when you're hired, but what about job performance and productivity and things like that? If, a lot of times you're compensated
right.
if you may have come in at a certain rate of pay, but based on your job performance, you've either earned a salary increase, maybe you're not performing as quite as well, and you're not going to get a raise. Is that part of this?
Not yet. Our charge was to come up with a base pay plan that positions wages and salaries competitively going forward.
Yeah.
So pay for performance, I view as a separate issue. I mean, they're related, but it's a separate thing. Most cities have shied away from that. It's fraught with problems. Coming from the private sector, we did pay for performance. And even the private sector, I was in I used to work for Melvin Simon Associates, the shopping mall developer, East Town in Knoxville, Mall of America, 50 million square feet across the country. It's now Simon Properties. They bought out some. Anyway, we had a development arm, the wheelers and dealers, and then we had a property management arm. These folks didn't pay attention to any of this stuff, and I think it caused trouble. Whereas over here, they paid a lot of attention. They were very disciplined in how they administered pay, and they had pay for performance that actually had some teeth in it, and I think it produced better results. Whereas over here, they did some things, they paid people regardless of performance, and I don't know, it was kind of a buddy, good old boy, who looks good, who doesn't, who has the nicest suits kind of thing. So over here, it was, let's look at the work and evaluate people's performance and put in some checks and balances so we have a pretty good idea that we're evaluating performance in the right manner. We've got pretty well-defined criteria for all the jobs, all that stuff, which is hard to do. So that's, I think, a separate thing. And Boyd and I talked about, is that somewhere, I talked to the department heads too, is that where we're going at some point? Do you want to head that way? Maybe, maybe not, but that's kind of a separate thing.
And then one other question.
Yeah.
Just another way of looking kind of at Charlie's question is just, do we know, so on the salary market index, the second finding there, 82%, that's if we slotted all of those employees in the correct pay grade at step 6, correct?
No, this is, well, if you were to do that, but we're not. So I prefer to describe it this, that 82%, so half the employees had salary indexes below 82%. So when we compared.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean 82. 89.
89, okay.
89.
So the average.
89 is if you slot everyone, regardless of tenure, in step 6.
Sorta. I mean, because the steps, as I'll describe how we get to the steps here in a minute. As you can imagine, if we take 6 jobs and put it in grade 5, they're going to have all slightly different market rates. It's highly unlikely it's going to exactly equal grade into step 6.
Yeah.
A little bit above, a little bit below. But so conceptually, yes, that's kind of right. But
if we took newer folks and tenured folks and put them in the ideal, and whenever we get to the end of this rainbow, hopefully, some people in step 15 because they've been here or they're really skilled, whatever, and some people that just got here in step 1 where they probably should be. Do we know what that 89% number would become?
No. So typically I don't do that, so
Yeah.
most jurisdictions don't have enough money. If you have a 15-year employee for whatever reason is in step 4, you'd like him to be at step 12, most of the time you don't have the money to do that. You need to apply that across all the employees in the organization. You know, some will be legitimately at step 1 or 2, but there's going to be some that need to go 3 or 4 steps, 6, 8, 10% to get to this where the quote unquote should be. So we very rarely recommend that because it costs too much. There's also other issues related to that too.
But at the same time, if we're slotting everybody in step 6, and I don't know if we have a more senior or new, probably senior when you adjust for salary weighting.
Yeah, but we're not proposing we adjust people to step 6.
I know, but I'm just thinking, that 89% isn't reflective of where people necessarily should be. That's just putting everybody all in the market.
That's not even looking at our pay scales yet. That's just looking at where they are compared to the market right now. We haven't even put them in steps.
And I'm trying to look at longer term
So,
goalposts.
all right. So let me go through letter E here, and that maybe answers some of those questions. So we're recommending this pay scale, pay structure you see on attachment 1, the 15 pay grades. Each pay grade, just by coincidence this time, happens to have 15 pay steps. That's a coincidence. They're not always, in fact, they're rarely equal. Usually have more, could have 15 pay grades and 13 steps or vice versa. They just happen to come out the same. Happenstance. So these are 2% steps. So every year, as long as the person met minimal qualifications for performance, they would move 1 step. Now, to kind of get to your question about cost of living and adjusting this whole thing, right now, employers' projected pay increase budgets for 2021 are running right around, I think the last number I saw was 3.1%. That's all industries across all industries, all levels. Exam, everything.
Can you say that number again?
About 3.1%. So as an employer, if your objective is to be competitive, you probably need to have a pay increase budget somewhere around
Okay, so that's
3%.
what I didn't understand when I asked that question. Every year the plan would be you move up a step.
Yes.
So that's kind of already some
We
of
got
the
2%.
cost of living.
We got 2%.
Okay.
Now, if you want to add to that to get closer to this 3% that the market is doing, you could add a 1%. I'd call it a market adjustment. So you'd have a total of 3 then, and you'd adjust the steps 1% to accomplish that.
Sorry,
you could do that.
If the market is 3.1%, why is our step 2%?
So we're trying to not obligate you folks to any particular number. So if I come out of the chute and say we're going to obligate you to 3% in a year, what if you can't quite do 3% in a given year?
What if 2% is the average?
Unfortunately, in step-based plan, your options are 1 step or no steps. You can't kind of go in between. I guess you could adjust all the steps 1% and just give everybody 1%, but then the employees aren't getting the step. So it gets kind of complicated. So my thought is let's have a conservative 2% step to which if you have the resources, you can add a labor market adjustment of 1% or 1.5 or 0.5%, whatever you think is appropriate that year, you can add to that.
If we do that, then aren't we throwing this whole step process into turmoil? I mean, if somebody steps up 2% and then we say, we're going to go ahead and give you another 1%.
So you'd have to adjust the steps 1%. So the way you do that is so the first thing you would do is we're going to have a labor market adjustment of 1%. Okay, you adjust all the steps 1%.
Yeah.
Then you move everybody to that next step. So they move 3%.
Okay.
So you adjust all the steps by 1%. So that's kind of how you helps keep the thing up to date. But the market may be moving a little bit faster than 1%, and so you kind of have to look at it every 2 or 3 years just to make sure you're keeping up.
How does the market historically move?
So pre-pandemic, for the recent past, going back 10 years or so, increased budgets were slowly creeping up from 2.5 to 2.6. I think 2019, I think the number was 3.2 or 3.3%. Then the pandemic hit, and everybody dropped to under 3. I think we're seeing everybody jump back on board with what they used to be doing. So we're slightly above 3% again. I remember the days when we had 13% CPI. Nobody was doing 13% pay increase budgets, but they had 8 and 7-8% increase budgets.
Didn't we just, aren't they talking about probably 5% CPI? Isn't that
So
what they're
you're
saying?
gonna have to kind of keep tabs on that and see
Yeah.
where you are. The cost of labor is probably not gonna track that. So one of the things as you look at the survey data every year, how employers respond to that increase in CPI should be in the data. If everybody were to match at 5%,
Right.
the salary should go up 5% in the data. But you probably won't. They're gonna match 5%. They're gonna maybe go from 3, maybe jump to 3.5, maybe to 4 in some cases, in some organizations, if that were to happen. So that's why you kind of need to keep tabs on what's going on in the labor market and adjust your steps accordingly, or otherwise you're gonna fall behind and not keep up with how other employers are responding to that 5% CPI, whatever that number would be.
Do you know what the average is? That's the 3.1 you mentioned is across public and private, I assume. Do you know what the average is, kind of Tennessee private, public?
So I did about 10 case studies last year, and we're doing another 10 right now for this coming year. And so what I'm hearing is that it's between 3 and 4%. And it may be a little bit skewed because I'm dealing with the Franklins and Williamson counties and Pigeon Forges and the Lebanons and Laverns and Tennessee and that. So it may be skewed a little bit because of some of who those employers happen to be. But I'll tell you what, it's everybody's scrambling to keep people. Everybody's talking about we need to have a $15 an hour floor. That's going to impact all this stuff. So I'm pretty confident that you're looking at 3 to 4% in most non-really rural jurisdictions. If you're out in the hinterlands, Bowling Ball, whatever, maybe they're not going to do that. But anybody that's close to Nashville or Knoxville or Chattanooga or Memphis, they're almost forced to do that. And in some cases, East Tennessee, I think Sevierville and Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg are kind of leading Knoxville instead of the other way around. So, to answer your question, I'd say 3 to 4% is kind of what's going on. That's what I'm hearing. So, I think Boyd said Hamilton County was planning 4%. Is that right?
Doing 4% with a minimum of $2,000. So if you make under $50,000, you're going to be getting over 4%.
So that's kind of what we're looking at. So we've got this pay structure. So the question is, how do we get the jobs and the pay rates? So that's pretty straightforward. You take a look at the market rate, determine survey for each job, and find the closest step 6. So step 6 is our nominal market rate. So if the job is worth, market rate is $26.95. The closest step 6 is $27.91 for grade 9. The job known as grade 9. So all jobs are assigned the pay grade for which step 6 most closely matches the market rate for the job. It's a pretty market rate. Okay. It might have been, I don't know if we made any exceptions. Once in a while when I do these, so once in a while we'll have an exception. The data just don't tell the whole story. And this job needs to be up here or down here. So once in a while we'll make some strategic management, Boyd and whoever the counterpart is in other jurisdictions, usually with the support input from the department head that hey, this job is, Steve, you're putting it in too high. It should be an 8 instead of 9, or no, that's because if you look at the hierarchy in our department, putting it in an 8, it's not going to work. It needs to be in a 9. So But for the most part, jobs are assigned pretty objectively.
Did we have any of those, or
Most close matches.
not with,
Grades.
don't call anything out, but did we have any of those?
I think did we make any exceptions or not? I don't,
I think the only thing was our clerk positions that are very comparable somehow ended up being two different grades, and we
Yeah.
rectified that.
and what I did is
That's the only thing I
I
remember.
went back and looked at the market data, and in two of those, there were three of them, in two of those cases, yeah, I probably matched them inappropriately to one of the databases, so after I did a more appropriate match, we moved
It
them
made
up.
sense.
I think the other one was shy, after I did that exercise, it was still shy of like 5 cents an hour, that was just moving up. So they were, I think that's the only exception we made. And even that, you know, there is no big book in the sky that says this job is worth X, Y, Z cents.
So just so I understand, you did not change anybody's pay grade when you did your,
So we started over, yeah, we throughout the current scheme of things. And
pay grades were thrown out the window.
Yeah, so we started with, implemented this in place of what you got to pay for there, and put them fresh in the pay grade, for which the market rate was supposed to match step 6. So in essence, throughout what they have there, starting fresh here. Okay, any questions how we got the jobs and the pay grades? All right. So then the next question is, what do we do with what's that? So, Boyd and I talked with someone about what to do, and we decided, based on what Wellington County, what I just told you about what's going on in the marketplace, we said, well, let's move all employee salaries 4%. And then we'll put them on the step closest to that rate. We're going to be at least 4%. Everybody would move 4%, and then they would find the step for their job as closest to that rate, put them on that step. Losing them because of that.
Rounding out.
So everybody get at least 4%, then we go to the next closest step. So some are going to go 10 cents an hour in addition to 4%, some are going to go $1.50 in addition to that 4%. It depends on by hooker, you know, by luck of the draw, where their salary fall relative to one of these steps.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yes.
Because that's something I didn't really understand.
Okay.
So it appeared that this 15-step system is current market rates.
Yeah, so step 6 represents the nominal market rate.
Right.
For each pay grade, yes.
So if you were to take all of our employees and say, we're going to put you in the step that matches where you should be, then I don't understand the 4% increase. It seems like you're doing kind of you're calling it a 2-step process when it could be just a 1-step process. We're going to take you
So we
here.
did it that way first. And what we found is that if you don't do something first, and then you just take everybody and put it to the closest step, a lot of people went in step 1. There are a lot of folks below step 1, so we go into step 1, and then so that too many. It didn't seem right. Too much pay compression going on. That's all we did. So we thought, let's spend 4% first. That will move some people into these steps further than step 1. Some will be still below step 1, but more will be in these steps somewhere, and will be less pay compression going on. So that's kind of how we decided to do that. I've done it both ways.
Can I ask a question of Mayor? When you say put them on the scale where they should be?
Yeah, maybe I don't really understand that. My understanding was that you were going to say, okay, this person should be at pay grade 7, step 3, based on their tenure and their market, the market value.
Yeah.
So
What I don't understand is why don't you say that's kind of phase 2.
All right, so what I'm asking is, why wouldn't you just say, okay, that's going to be your salary?
Because
Instead of saying, I'm going to increase it 4%.
That's what, this is later.
Yeah. We could do
If
that.
we did that now, it would cost us way more than what they're talking about.
We ran the numbers, and Based on what we're talking about here, we figure this is probably as much as you're all gonna bite off in one fell swoop here. And in the personnel committee, we talked about maybe this is, a down the road kind of thing, maybe it's next year, or at some point in the future, when we do look at in a pretty conservative manner, look at, the relationship between job tenure and pay, and do a little bit more of what you're talking about. Okay, we've got a 5-year person, we just put him in step 2 here, he probably should be more like step 4. But if you can imagine, if we did an extra 4% for everybody, we're doing 4 plus 4, the number goes up pretty quickly. So it's best to
most people are several steps below their tenure level as it stands now. And we're still at a big number. If we plugged everybody in relative to their tenure, it would just be astronomical. As a one bite, do it all the time.
So I very rarely do that. Even in the organizations that have a fair amount of resources, it's pretty hard to put everyone in exactly where they should be in tenure. So the goal is trying to get it closer, but not exactly there. And then the other thing I make a point of is many organizations, the jobs are evolving. So the fact that you've been police chief for 10 years, or certified grade 4 water plant operator for 10 years, that's a good example. But so the job you're doing now, the job you're faced with now, bears no resemblance to the job that you looked at 10 years ago, that you were in 10 years ago, trying to scope, involvement, population, other things. So one could argue it's maybe not even appropriate to count all 10 years when doing this analysis. And by the way, it costs too much anyway. So it's got to give us an excuse not to do it. And I think a rational.
Do we see a strong correlation of tenure and pay when we look at government jobs like this? I mean, naturally we would think there's a line like this, but also the market's adjusting too.
So versus population, like I said, the higher you get an organization, the more population is a proxy for the complexity of the job. So the lower you get, not so much. So you'll find stronger relationships at the higher level. If you did that analysis for parks maintenance worker, lots of people.
Yeah. Well, but for tenure, I'm saying like we've built this to eventually reflect.
By tenure, theoretically, there should be a pretty straight line between tenure and pay. Now, it's going to vary. Some organizations will factor in performance. Some will factor in qualifications like education and certifications, and so that impacts their relationship.
And do we see that being a 2% per year correlation? I guess would be the question, because that's what we have built here.
It's kind of hard to come up with that.
Okay.
And that's kind of how we developed what we have now. Even though our market was low before, it was even lower, and it took a long time to get there. So, like for fire and police, if no experience, no certification, nothing, you come in now. But if you're already certified, we can bring you in at P1.
Mm-hmm.
If you're certified and you've got 3 years experience, we're gonna bring you in at P2. And then once you've been here for a year on top of that, then you move to market.
So I worry about that because
one thing this is going to be a struggle with is over the next year or two, we've got to try to build something like that in. But before we can do that, we have to get the people that are already here up to scale some.
We're moving the non-certified recruit rate from $16.99 now to $19.80.
I guess we have to reflect that difference between the super experienced P3 and the P1 by having it be a different pay grade, right?
Right. And again, that's something we'll have to build in, and something the personnel committee stressed is that this needs to be a process, and we've in this recommendation, we've got those folks from step 1 at least up to step 2, so we've got a little bit of room below them. In a year, hopefully we move them 1, maybe 2 steps up further, and then we can start building in
The other concern I have about step one in this framework is that if we aren't going to apply in the way people move through it, if we aren't going to apply a cost of living increase to the whole thing, we're going to become uncompetitive in step one because we're never, or we're increasing it only 1% when the market's up 3 or 4, right? So
yeah, there's a difference between how salaries are moving, which is that 3% figure, and how the market, how the structures. So if you take the example of a police officer, if you look at 50 organizations, what's the market rate for a police officer? You come up with an average. And you compare it to the next year. Well, what's happening that time? Some of those officers have been promoted to corporal or sergeant. Some have quit altogether. So you brought in new folks to replace them, typically at the bottom of the pay scale. So the market rate for a police officer, because of the coming and going, is moving slower than the pay increase budgets for the employer, because they're just dealing with the employees that they have, and if they're there, you get 50%. So
that doesn't move as quickly.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, but you're right. I mean, you kind of have to keep tabs on that pay scale.
And that might be part of that 2-3 year.
You don't want this to lag too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So we answered all the questions there so far.
Sorry.
I think so. But,
we're an inquisitive bunch.
Yeah, that's fine. That's all good questions.
That was a kind way to put that.
This is actually going pretty well compared to some of them. As you can imagine, this can be pretty wild sometimes. Anyway, most of the time. All right, so the other thing we did a little bit of looking at tenure and job. We recognized that some of the pay compression issues are related to tenure, and not recognizing tenure in the pay scale with employees' current pay rate. So if you look at the page 2 of the handout, you see this little chart labeled target pay step. So what we did in essence is set up in this pay structure the target step for these different amounts of tenure. So if somebody's been in the job less than 2 years, you need to be at least at step 1, pretty straightforward. If they've been in the job 2 but less than 6 years, you need to be at least at step 2. If not, we'll leave it there. And if somebody's been in the job 6 but less than 10 years, they need to be at least at steps 3, if they're not moving there. And if they've got 10 or more years in their job, it's all in their job tenure, they need to be at least at step 4, if not moving there. So we've done a little bit, we haven't gone overboard here by any route to stretch the imagination. We have done a little bit of trying to improve that linkage between current pay, recommended pay rates, and tenure and job. So we haven't completely disregarded that, but as you can see, this is not too generous, too robust, whatever word you want to use. This is a pretty conservative approach at looking at tenure and pay, doing something to improve that linkage. So we're not going crazy here.
You mentioned, you have in parentheses 9 employees. What do you mean by that?
So when we apply this chart across the whole population, only 9 employees were below their targets.
Partially because the 4% is already
right. If we hadn't done the 4%, we would have more in this category.
Yeah.
You might speak into the microphone.
Okay.
Yeah. And Steve, push it away from you,
Okay.
keep it down.
Okay.
And then you can still use your hands, because it seems
I'm
like...
whack it, yeah. Thank you. All right, so there were only 9 employees. When we applied this chart across the whole population of employment for the town of Signal Mountain, only 9 people were below these targets.
Okay.
So
Now, there's a bunch that are going to step 1, but as far as the other targets, there were only 9 that got
Can I
an
say
extra tenure adjustment out of this exercise. Yes.
And the 9 employees, are they located in one area and more than another? Like, is it more police officers?
No, it was kind of spread across. Departments. I can take a gander here, and I think.
Thanks.
And let's see, had a fair number in police,
Fire.
some in public works. Those are probably the 2 largest groupings. Some in fire, yeah. So.
And you said this is after the 4% is
yes,
applied.
yes.
If we hadn't done the 4% on the front end, then there would have been a larger number.
Right,
that
right.
this got.
Yes.
That kind of took care of some of it.
Right.
So along those lines, I love this table. What I would love to see is, the way I think about it, maybe I'm backwards, is as far as the recommended numbers, 1 and 3 and 4 and 5, and then 2 as an if at the end. If we haven't increased somebody 4% after we've done all this, we increase them 4%. There's one at the bottom where we're doing 4% first, and we see the impact of that. I would like to see that.
We could do it.
Yeah, like that.
Could do that.
Then we see like, let's get pay structure right, and then let's fix some of these other issues, like slightly adjust for tenure. We know we're not getting where we really should be.
Right.
And then let's mitigate any pay compression. And then if we haven't given a 4% increase to kind of stay up with times here, let's do that. That would be.
It would be a different
way
number. It would be a different number. And
Because
we talked
we're
about the
washing,
issue
right?
is you're going to have more pay compression. Yeah, I think this approach, move everybody 4%, then find the step.
Yeah, but we're still going to get to the same end result. It's just that the numbers here of the impacts, like the
We'll go from one
reality
column to
is,
the other, but yeah.
the reality is some of that 4%
Right.
belongs in the step increase too, right?
So, yeah, the numbers will move from one column to another.
Yeah, and that, I think that's important
We
because.
can run that and run those numbers and see what the difference is.
Is that too much to
No,
ask?
no.
Yeah.
Many times when I do these, what do you want to do first? Get everybody to the step and then move the
Yeah,
step?
that's the way.
Then do your
Yeah, I
constant
was gonna
living?
ask you to repeat kind of what your
So
proposal is.
kind of the process as you follow it along in this table is, number one is like, hey, let's determine where they fit in the grid, right? And let's set up this grid. And then number 2 is let's do a 4% increase everywhere. And then number 3 is, all right, move them to the right step. And that's the second column, the column after 4% increase, right? The step annual increase. We see the impact of that. But that impact, we're not seeing the full impact of just doing that because we already did the 4% increase, right? So some of that, where there are some situations certainly where somebody maybe was close to an appropriate rate and the 4% increase is boosting that total number. We can't just add them together to determine the impact of the step increase.
So what you'll find is the number will be a little bit lower because it's, and the numbers will move from one column to the next. So the upshot of it all is, I think the way we're looking at it, we're not doing enough. If we're charged with making our plan competitive, and we want to position our people competitively, that approach kind of lowers the number, but it also means we're not doing as much.
Well, it doesn't lower the number. We're going to end up with the same number at the end.
Close.
We're going to end up with the same number at the end because we're going to say if we didn't give 4%.
If you do that, yeah.
If we didn't give 4%, if we gave them 3.9, bump them to 4.
Right.
And that 0.1 goes in that last column, not the first column.
Now, the problem with the step-based plan, remember, we have to end up on a step. So.
Well, you already put them on it.
Yeah, but if you do 1%, they're going to fall off a step again. So if they're $50 short of the 4%, you give them $50, they're not on a step anymore. In the pay range system, you can do that.
So I guess another question is, did we do the 4% before or after we determine the appropriate grade?
Well,
So
the pay grade, that's a separate analysis. We're just, when we're looking at which pay grade that you win, that's just the jobs.
Yeah.
We're not looking at employee salaries, 4%, none of that enters into that equation. That's just the job. Now we're talking about where do the employees, which step do they go into? So if we do the 4% first, that's kind of it's probably the best way to ensure everybody gets at least 4%. If you put them in a step,
it's the same thing at the end.
Well, if you put them in a step, and depending on where they fall, and then do. So explain again what
Sorry,
exactly.
I'm saying, I'm
always
confused.
gonna
I'm
be that we
confused. I'm
couldn't put
using the
everybody
wrong
in the step.
terminology. Hang on. Put them in the right grade, right?
Right,
which is, and put them,
So we're talking grade.
all right, put them in the right grade, I'm saying
Yeah, that
steps.
happens no matter what.
Yeah, put them in the right grade.
Right.
And that should be the first column of impact. Everybody at step one, which is
Everybody,
not
at
what
least
we're
if they're not
doing.
at step one. then-
Yeah, step one for the right grade.
Right.
May I ask,
And that's,
so this is to make sure I'm understanding what you're
Yeah.
saying. I want to hear what you're saying. If what Steve was saying though is that they're so close to that grade that doesn't give them the equivalent of the 4%.
yeah,
Would you jump a step for them?
you have to, right?
But then they're getting more than 4%, where some people are.
No,
getting
no,
less.
hang on. All right, so
Sorry.
they all go in step one in the right grade.
All right.
All right, and that's
Okay.
first column, and that's basically what you're doing on the two
Right.
annual increase. And then we adjust for tenure, as in this table here, target
Okay,
step.
so you
Yeah.
get extra
So you
steps.
get a little bit extra,
Right.
and that's probably gonna be about the same number.
Yeah.
And then, then I would like to see the pay compression after that. Because I think those are like, to me, step 1, 2, and 3. So that target the pay compression, and that's, again, a small number here. I'm pretty sure we had that somewhere. Pay compression, or I saw it somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And then the last one is, if after we've done all that, from their current rate, they haven't gotten 4%, we move them to a 4% increase. And that is gonna move them up.
So they're gonna have to go up another step. To the next-
Well, but so, in some cases, I think you may have already dealt with it with the tenure
Yeah,
or something,
may
you
have,
know.
may have,
So
right.
maybe that number's really
Could
small,
be.
but I would like to see it in that order so that we see what's the impact of the overall 4%.
Okay,
we're
so I wrote this down. Let me make sure I wrote this down right. So first thing we're gonna do, get them in the right job grade.
It's just basically changing the
If
order.
they're below step one, we're gonna move them to step one. Then we're going to apply this tenure thing. Is that what we're saying? Okay. And then after that, if we're still below 4% for an individual
Hang
person.
on,
Oh,
pay compression, because I think that's important too.
okay, which we
It's all
kind of looked
important,
at,
but
yeah.
yeah.
So after we've done all that, if we're still less than 4%, we'll make up the difference.
Yes.
Okay, but we have to end up on a step.
We'll have to look at compression again, find that may,
It's going to leapfrog some.
Yeah.
it could cause a problem.
And
Why
then
can't you,
some
maybe
people
you
get
did, just
more,
to take out the compression
some less.
before you move them. And
Okay,
then-
so maybe compression goes after
Yeah.
that, and that's fine.
I'm concerned that would,
Small dollars, I think.
I'm concerned that would, the end result would be, something that would be, I don't wanna use the word unfair, I think that's not a good
It results in the
professional
exact
term.
same end
be,
result that you.
It would not be, something that would be equitable, am I right or wrong?
You know, I'm kind of one of those analytical types that, to answer this question, I have to go play with the numbers and come back.
And if the results are the
Exact same
same,
result.
if the
I
results
think
are the
it's just
same,
showing us the
The
impact
results-
of the different steps.
In terms of dollars, it's gonna be pretty close. I think the number's gonna be a little bit different. And we have a step-based plan, so we have to end up on a step.
Yeah.
So, you know, if we're shy $50, we can't spend $50, we gotta go a whole 2% to the next step, or 2.1%, whatever it is. Or 1.8, whatever. So I'd have to play around with the numbers. I think the reason we came up with this approach was we felt it was the best way, most straightforward way to guarantee everybody 4% and allow us to get people on the pay plan and allow us to look at this tenure thing in a limited manner and look at pay compression.
I think, one thing to consider too are just the optics of doing a 4% cost of living increase. It kind of sends a positive message to our employees that we recognize the cost of living increase is needed. And that's not really, that's just an optical thing, but I think it sends, if you're talking about morale.
What I am saying comes to,
I know.
I'm fairly certain the exact same
I think it
mathematical
would.
results.
I'm just-
not like,
No, I know. I'm not trying to pick apart your.
dang near it. Like, I'm not,
I think.
I just want to see the impact of the steps not
Okay.
muddled.
Yeah,
between the 4%
Okay,
and this,
yeah.
and getting on the pay plan, right?
Yeah.
Getting on,
Yeah.
my step one is, I think, process-wise, and I get why you guys did it the way you did. That's a much simpler approach than the way I'm talking about, obviously. Is we need to adjust market rates, right? Like, we have a problem that's evidenced in these other tables that we want to fix.
Right.
So let's try, and no, we're not getting to market, but let's get to step one. What's the impact of that?
Right.
Without any of this other stuff.
Okay, yeah.
And I think you're right. We have to do, the order of it would be get to step one in the appropriate pay grade,
Right.
apply tenure,
Okay.
mitigate compression. Sorry, no. 4%, then mitigate compression.
Okay.
And I would like to see those impacts.
Okay, we can do that.
Is that, I mean, if it's too much,
No,
don't like, hey,
it's
it's too much.
not too hard.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, it's not like you have 500 employees, so we can do that.
And it's an if on the 4%,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And we can see what the results are. You know, if you'll note at the bottom right-hand corner of this chart on page 2 here, see 96%. So after what we've done with this approach, we've moved the average Signal Mountain employee from 89% of market to 96% of market. So we'd have to do the same analysis with your approach, and that be pretty close, I would think, but it may be a little different. Right?
If you don't come up with the same result, I'll be happy to sit down with you, because it should be the
I
same
have a
result.
question about that chart you just mentioned, the salary market index. If you take out seasonal and part-time, it ranges from 86% to 92%.
Right.
Is that's number D2?
Yeah,
Or a
the
quarter
very
of our
bottom line,
employees-
I've taken the 89%, I've taken the seasonal out.
I know, but are a quarter of our employees seasonal and part-time? I mean, no one other than them is below 86%. According to that chart.
Yeah, the 89% does not include that 76% for seasonal part-time. I've taken that out. But yeah.
I'm wondering on D2, it says a quarter of employees were below 82%.
Because this excluded the seasonal part-time. I should have said that. Excluded,
So that quarter is all seasonal and part-time.
but in this number excludes them. Okay.
No, I understand. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
So in these departments, in finance, the average is 89%, but there might be a couple employees who are 79%. So these are averages for departments, so it varies by job.
Does the chart on page 2 includes all of our employees on page 2?
Yeah.
But when you
Seasonal part-time,
I
you see
see-
that
I
third line
understand
from the
that.
bottom, that's where all the seasonal part-time are.
yeah,
Yeah, okay.
but I mean that is everybody.
Everybody's on this piece of paper, yeah.
And then, but when you go to D2, it says a quarter of employees were below 82%, half were between 82% and 95%, a quarter were above 95%. Okay?
All right,
If you
so
look
that's
at
not
the chart,
completely true because I'm not counting the seasonal part-time in those calculations.
in D2 doesn't count the seasonal and part-time.
Does not.
Okay.
Because I felt that skewed it, and many cities can view that, okay, we're gonna take care of our full-time regular employees first, and then we'll look at seasonal, and if we have some money left over, we'll do something with that.
Okay.
That's the approach a lot of people take.
I guess my question then would be, so are these averages then?
Yeah,
Of
yeah.
all the employees? Like if you have 89% for Parks and Rec, are you saying that some could be below 82%?
Oh, yeah,
And some
yeah,
above?
yeah. And the seasonal part-time are not in that number for
Yeah.
Parks and Rec, that number. So, yeah, these are averages. So some are gonna be above that, some are gonna be below. These are averages across all the jobs in each department.
Okay.
So I purposely took the seasonal part-time out, separated them as a separate line. The overall comparisons to market, the 89% and going to the 96% after all this, I didn't want to include the seasonal part-time in there because that's, I think, skews the numbers and it's not an accurate representation of what we're trying to focus on here. Now, that's not saying those are unimportant people or the jobs are not underpaid a little bit, but you know, I think most cities take the tack of let's take care of our full-time people first. Make sure we get that right. We have some money left over and we want to do something for lifeguards and seasonal landscapers. Well, we can do that.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So if we take the methodology we followed here, what happens? So the median increase to the closest step is $842. That's after the 4% increase. You see some $2,439 for 30 employees going to step one. So we still have a lot of people going to step one. The median tenure-based or compression adjustment, 9 people were impacted by this little chart here, the tenure thing. The balance were adjusted based on our look at pay compression, trying to create daylight between people with different amounts of tenure, trying to create daylight between lieutenants and sergeants, that kind of thing. There were, let's see, 27, I think there were 18 people that fell in that category. So that's 27 folks. Average tenure-based compression adjustment is $789. The smallest was $729. The largest was $4,110. So the median total increase, including the 4% general increase, is $29.90. Half the employees got less than $23.37. Half between $23.37 and $41.85. And 1/4 of the employees got total increases over $4,185. And you can see the percentage breakout there. So everybody's getting at least 4% out of this. You know, everybody's getting at least 4%. So we're getting more. And everybody ends up on a step. And you can see how this is arrayed by department. I included job tenure. This excludes the seasonal part-time, that average job tenure by department. For the small numbers, it can be skewed by 1 or 2 long in the tooth employees. It's an average. Sometimes maybe the median would be a better number there. But anyway, I calculated the average. So you can see the tenure varies by department. One would think there's a relationship between tenure and relative standing of current employee salaries to market. Not really a strong relationship there in some cases, but and you can see the dollar amounts as we figured it here for each of those categories, the 4% number to the next step, and then the tenure adjustment increase. Total $294,674. Excluding the seasonal part-time. 323 if you include that. And again, you may or may not want to do everything we suggest for the seasonal part-time. Yeah, that's kind of, like I say, the last to be funded group. Yes?
My question is, when I'm looking at all this, my thought is, where's the most need? As far as if we're gonna have to look at this and we say we can't do this much, we need to prioritize.
Right.
Where would you say, what department or departments would you say are critical at this point?
Well,
can you answer that even? I don't know, I might be asking a dumb question.
Yeah.
I'm good at those.
I think police is probably an important one because of what's just going on in the marketplace. Everybody's having issues recruiting and retaining police officers. And you know, we're talking about moving the starting rate from $16.99 to $19.80. So that should help a lot. And of course, it kind of feathers on the way up. We're not everybody's going in at $19.80. The people who've been here a while are going to be going in a couple steps higher. So I think that's a critical need. To answer your question, it may not be by department, it may be by job level. So entry-level jobs kind of across the board, whether it's in parks, public works, water, all of those entry-level jobs are the laborer types, equipment operators. We're having trouble with all of those. I think all of those are key.
Okay, thank you.
So,
that's awesome.
Yeah, so a question, we've skirted around the seasonal labor thing a bunch, but that's been critical.
Especially now.
It's, and in the seasonal part-time, that's seasonal and part-time. So we have some permanent part-time folks that are figured into that too, like library clerks and, the transfer station attendant and stuff. They're not just seasonal, but they are part-time positions. So in the calculations that I gave you the memo, and then Carol ran everything that included benefits and all of that, all that's included. That's all inclusive of those positions.
Okay.
Including lifeguards and gym attendants and, all the things we're having trouble hiring people at $9 an hour to do. We kind of see why now. But I was gonna say the same thing, Steve. I don't think it's as much a departmental scenario as it is a job. We have to look at the jobs and see where we have the greatest discrepancy between where we are and where we need to be. And I think that would, if you do that, I think we track exactly the positions we're having a hard time filling.
Or the positions that we're seeing the greatest, folks leave after a short period of time of being.
Right, and
Like retention.
that's the struggle there. If you look at those entry-level positions, and if you're, just based on how I think your question was meant, if we have limited funds, where do we need to put them?
Right.
Then you resolve the issue of being able to hire people, and maybe keep those people for a while, but then you have the people who have been here for a while and have some experience and training under their belt, and they're stagnant. They are our most marketable.
Right. We train them and we get them to that point and then they leave, correct? Because because they can go short miles away and make more money.
Right.
Okay.
So sometimes what employers will do to answer that question is, let's identify the employees who are who are furthest away from the market rate for their jobs. Let's fix those first, whatever department it is, whatever level. Could be a department head, could be entry level. Maybe you do that.
And you have that, and we have that in
The
place.
problem with that is the cherry picking thing is,
Is it?
you take care of some people, but most of the people are upset. So I think this is kind of where we landed on the 4% thing. All right, everybody's getting 4% out of this. Everybody's pretty happy. They talk to the neighbor, they're getting probably as good an increase as anybody. So we're taking care of that aspect. Now we're going to get them on the pay plan in the step, closest to that rate of pay, not less. And we're going to do a little extra for some of these tenure-related things. We're going to look at compression a little bit. We're going to fix some of that. But everybody's getting at least a 4% thing. So that's kind of the floor. This seemed to be the easiest way to do that. But we can run the numbers the other way and see how it ends up. And where we end up relative to, I would like to know where our ending salary index is under that approach. It's probably gonna be a whole lot different, but maybe a little bit different, and maybe different by job or by department. So we have to kind of look at that. So anyway.
How much time do you think it would take to do this other calculation?
Oh, not that hard. I mean,
We could have it in
I could get it to you
days.
Monday. Yeah. I'm doing Murray County right now, and I've been in meetings all day yesterday, all day today, all day tomorrow, all day Thursday. So I can't really get to it too quickly, but by Friday I'm free. So I think I can do that. It's not that hard.
Yeah, we have a budget.
Saturday.
Okay. Well, let me see if I can do that. I don't know. That may be, I'll see.
If the bottom line isn't going to change significantly, then maybe that's, and I don't think it will. I think it'll, bottom line may be saying it may move people.
It may move some things based on like the rounding up that happens during the process, but not anything. It'll,
So we can
play around with that. Because I think my original recommendation, or the initial I hesitate to use a recommendation. My first shot was that we moved them people after I got them in the steps, right? And then we talked back and forth, and maybe I didn't show that to you, but I kind of did it, I think. So it should be hard to come up with that. Because when I work with clients, I do it both ways. The 4% thing is maybe a little bit more expensive if you do it first.
Well, you may find like
But
pay grades and tenure changes, there's not
Yeah,
much
maybe
that 4% is really doing. I don't know.
Yeah,
Like
you're
that's
right,
what,
you're right.
yeah.
It'll be interesting to see a side-by-side comparison for sure.
Yeah.
And again, it won't affect the grades
Yeah.
of jobs really.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, our employees are gonna be getting a cost of living. I mean, we're adjusting it, we're fixing it, and that's the message that
Yes.
needs to go home for sure.
I did take
Well,
like the
some
message
would-
of the 4% first, you know. But
What?
You would potentially have some who don't get the 4% by the way that Andrew's talking about moving it to the steps.
No.
You think I'm misunderstanding that?
Yes.
Is it Steve?
So the way I understand it, I think he's right. We first get everybody to step one if they're not at step one. Okay? Then we look at the tenure thing, give them an extra step.
This is like a price volume mix analysis, and we've done it in an order where we're mixing. When you get to the next step and you look at the impact of that change,
Okay.
you've mixed the prior step, and I just want to see
Okay.
what is you see what I'm saying?
Because you jumped
yeah.
a step at that point.
Yeah,
Okay.
I want the 4%
Yeah.
to be one of the last ones. Doesn't have to be if we need to put compression after.
So the first thing is we're gonna get everybody on a step. In some cases, that'll be step one. In some
Step-
cases, it'll be step three. It could be
And
step four.
adjust for tenure the way
Then we're
do
gonna
it.
look at the tenure. So
Yeah.
somebody will go into an extra step because of that. Then we'll look at then we'll do the 4% calculation.
And then
If
compression.
they're not there, we have to maybe move them to the next step to make sure they get at least 4%, whatever. Okay, and then look at compression. Is that right?
Yeah, those
Okay,
would be
all right.
the columns I would.
Yeah, we can do that. We can do that.
So this kind of goes back to a previous question I had. When you're putting people on the step, how are you deciding where they're gonna go? Because the question is that if you're gonna put them at step one and then give them a 4% increase, why don't you just put them at step 2 or 3?
Because
That's 4%.
it's that order was confusing for me.
Yeah.
The 4% happens, and then only if step one is higher, correct, do we move them based on the pay grading.
So what we did here is we moved everybody 4%, we gave everybody 4%, calculated 4%.
Yep.
And we found the step that's closest to that number, but not less, put them at that step. Okay? Then we looked at the tenure thing, gave them an extra step if, for these 9 people, got an extra step, or 2, probably only one extra step, I think, in the case of all 9. And then we looked at pay compression, supervisor subordinates, people with different amounts of tenure. We identified about 18 people that we thought we needed to give an extra step to because that would help mitigate the pay compression. So that's the approach we've taken.
So what you didn't mention there that I think is confused is there's an if in there, which
Right.
is that's already happening. Which let's say Bob's paid $9.
Yeah.
Bob grades out to a 8. We've been way underpaying Bob.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we calculate 4% on $9.
Right.
Okay, but the reality is Bob needs to move to 2237. Bob's going to move to 2237, and then we'll do the tenure thing. But if Bob was already paid instead 2630, he's just going to get his 4%. We're not going to move him back to the 2237.
Right.
That might not be that. So if Bob should be at step 1, pay grade 8, and he's above that, and we give him a 4% increase, then he's beyond where he should be. But I guess you're saying nobody's going to get
There
beyond
were,
where they should be.
so if we had, by luck of the draw, hired a person yesterday at the new step 1, you know, they would get the 4% increase. They'd go beyond the step one. That didn't happen. I don't think it's the
Oh,
case
yeah.
in most instances here. We have,
And this thing
those
is-
folks aren't at that rate.
This thing is time-based as well. It's time-based. I mean, some people, the way that you're proposing the 4% and moving to the step plan, it's not like we wait a year and move to the step plan. It's as people move throughout the year and reach their, it doesn't have to do with when they reach their year or when they reach their next.
With moving to this, everything will be,
It'll be caught up.
Physical.
as of whatever day it becomes effective, that's when it'll be.
I mean, that could be
So
an
you have
alternative
A common review.
way of
review
getting
date.
there, I
Yeah.
suppose, but that,
Okay.
the
So-
impacts here are a full annual
And
impact.
as new people come in, they'll be on their annual date. They won't be on this.
Well, that's something you have to decide. Right now, you have the pay increases scheduled on anniversary dates, right?
Right.
So what most employers do, especially if you have any thought of doing pay performance, is have a common review date. So everybody's getting a pay adjustment July 1. It's easy to budget.
So it's
You don't have to-
prorated.
You don't, yeah, everybody gets.
Is that what you guys do?
Not currently,
Yeah,
but,
currently, you have to prorate it, right?
but that would be easier administratively, is that right?
Easier to budget. Wouldn't it be easier to budget?
Yes, yes, that's what I'm
There
thinking.
are pros and cons to both.
Yeah.
Right now, while you're in the steps, it's on either hire day anniversary or academy graduation anniversary. If we hire you in uncertified, at minimum, you go to the academy. The day you graduate from the academy, that becomes your anniversary. And then after you've been a certified officer for a year. So it varies, but while you're in those steps, it's an anniversary of some sort.
Right.
Once you hit market, that goes away, and it's an annual, whatever we can do for raises
But
scenario.
at the same
Once you hit
time,
step 6.
going to the July or whatever creates a really weird situation. What if you hire somebody May 1st? Now you got to say, well, either we're not giving you one for 13, where do you cut that off?
So most employers will
Same
cut it
thing would
off
happen with
April
implementation.
1,
April 1,
March,
okay.
something like that. Most employers will do that. So you
Okay.
have to be in your position 2 months,
Please
3 months
hire me
before you get that
March
step on
30th.
July 1. Yeah, yeah. So there's a little bit of that, but, yeah, it's pretty, to my mind, it facilitates easier budgeting.
Yeah,
It's
no,
gonna move a step.
absolutely, yeah,
Yeah,
that would be
once they're in the plan, if we know everybody's gonna move a step July 1st, 12 months impact, pretty easy to calculate.
That makes a lot of
Um,
sense.
yeah.
Fiscal year.
And if you're gonna do pay for performance, yeah, you have to do all your reviews at once, but I'll tell you what, if you do them spread out throughout the year, you lose all focus on what you're trying to do, and you can't really compare one to another, which you kind of end up doing. You can't do that if you're reviewing one in January and one in July. So pay for performance, I think, is to me, a non-starter if you don't have a common review day. It's just too hard.
If you don't have an
And
HR.
all of those things speak to why that process in general is a problem.
Yeah.
We ran, I mean, it was, but.
It's hard to do.
But as far as budget goes, I guess in discussion purposes, I think running it differently and providing some details, bottom line, we're dealing with pretty much the same number. And the decision is that number digestible or not? So, I mean, that's something we can still start working on in advance of getting that as necessary.
Just as a point of procedure for council, so we will vote, we will get to a place where we vote and we say, this is the budget that we want to vote on. And we will vote on the budget we want to vote on, and then they prepare that budget, and there might be some minor changes, because there's almost always when it goes to them, and they bring it to us for, the first and second reading on that. That's not the same day that we decide, okay, we've all agreed that this is what we're gonna do. And all this stuff gets calculated at that point, and it's confusing, because you think people will say, well, you guys voted on the budget. You're like, well, no, we voted on the budget we're gonna vote on. It's one of the steps.
Yeah.
in this thing.
But before we can get to any of those points, we have to know what to put in it.
Right.
Right.
That it's not already there.
Well, that's where then a miracle happens.
Yeah.
Comes into the equation.
And just to put in perspective, we have the meeting Saturday, regular meeting following Monday.
One more.
Budget has to be passed before the end of August, which means we only have the first and second meeting in August to do those two readings. So we're
there.
in front.
Saturday is in front.
And there has to be a specific length of time before that second, between that first and second meeting to allow for,
Advertising.
required advertising of the budget and advertising for the public hearing. So it's not like we can say, we will have the first meeting on Friday and we'll have the second reading on Monday.
Second
We
meeting.
can't do that.
Yeah.
So,
I guess process-wise, given that this is our timeline right now, is crunched, and this is a big, important issue. The only thing that can't be reconciled or changed in an amendment later would be the tax rate, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So really, that we have to put a stamp in for sure and not be working on anymore by those dates.
And if anything that is ultimately funded in the budget is dependent upon that tax rate, then that has to be determined.
You guys all saw that we're getting $14,700 more. I think all our answers are wrong.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We
Good.
have gotten a little astray. I don't want to keep Mr. Thompson here any longer
Yes.
than he has to be. So we can talk about this after he leaves. If anybody has more questions for him, let's address it now so we can.
What I've gone through, it kind of makes sense, you understand what we did, why we did it, how we did it, pretty much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Really enjoy your.
I just wanted to clarify, and I think I may have touched on this in the email, but what you have here, the summary and everything dated July 20th versus July 6th, I believe, represents the recommendation from the Personnel Committee, which the original recommendation, they voted unanimously to recommend, with the caveat that we look at the compression issues and all of that, and that's the difference between these two things.
Did you do it sounds like you've gone through this analysis per position.
Per person.
Per person, yeah. Can we see that, or is that something that we're not entitled to?
So here's my take on that. So usually when I get in front of the elected officials, I don't like to hand out what Susie's getting or Johnny's getting because somebody's gonna raise an issue about Sally, and then we have a big discussion over there about Sally not doing the job or whatever, and yeah.
I get that.
So, to my way of thinking, that's not part of the purview of the elected officials. You all, I think, my recommendation is you look at the big picture, the numbers, approve the budget. Management does the details in terms of how they spend those dollars. So we have done all that work behind the scenes. I've got it right here. So that feeds into these numbers that you can tie all these numbers back to this by-person analysis. So you can see it if you want, but I usually don't present that at these sessions. And usually
Your
I'm told
advice
not
is
to.
that's not productive.
Yeah. I mean, some very mature elected official commissions, boards, whatever, it's no problem. But then I run into one where, so why in the heck are we paying Johnny this? And then, oh my gosh.
We're fairly mature, but.
Yeah, you are.
Not
So,
That kind of goes along with, I mean, on the front end, like I said, when we were given guidance, I may have driven him a little bit crazy because he would ask me, well, what do you think? I'm like, I want you to do it.
Yeah.
I don't want to influence this. I want you to tell us what we need to know. And then we'll go back and plug people in. And that's what we've done, and it washed out the way it washed out. With very few adjustments, like you said, a little bit of tenure, a little bit for compression. Other than that, I wanted it to be as pure a process as possible, and tried to do the same thing and not worry about what particular individual is getting what. I think that if an individual through this process, independent of any outside pressure, he says this is where they need to be, in a competitive market, this is what you should be paying this person, and a lot of this doesn't even get to there. This just gets us headed in that direction. If they're not of the caliber that they, for lack of a better term, deserve that, they shouldn't be working here, and they wouldn't be working. So I think that's.
And usually when I do these, somewhere in here, I go back to the department heads. Usually after you all approve the big number, I go back to the department heads and show their department, employee by employee, okay, here's how the jobs fill out, here's how the employees fill out, what do you think? Once in a while, we'll say, Steve, this job's too high, it should be down this grade, or this should go up a grade now. So that will impact this person's salary a little bit with step-based plans. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. So there'll be some of that if we do that. But that's just fine-tuning. Very rarely changes the number a whole lot. You often find there's as much going up as there is going down, so it's pretty much a wash. Sometimes there's a little bit of a bias towards numbers going up, but it's usually not a huge number. Because Boyd and I have kind of looked over this every different ways, and so we're pretty comfortable. But there's that step for fine-tuning before implementation. Okay.
Anybody have any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, this has been fun, yeah.
You can stay if you want to.
Well, I tell you what.
Stick around a minute or two.
Yeah. I think I'll
Because the
head out.
minute you walk out, somebody will put things in the
Yeah, I know. Call me tomorrow.
But you've got a bit of a drive.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We had some discussion on the budget. Now discussion, adoption of new pay plan. Have we done that, or?
No, that's kind of what I had down. One minor, and it's only minor, Andrew, about adopting the personnel committee's recommendation as presented. If we're changing it, are we adopting it as presented? If we're asking him to calculate it a different way. Because that's a different plan than what they went over.
It's not materially different.
The answer is no, you're not adopting what was recommended, but until we see that, I don't know how significant any changes might be.
So can we even vote on anything then?
We don't have anything to vote on.
Well, no,
tonight.
I mean, was this just purely informational, or was this a decision-making meeting, or is it a
Discussion.
There's, anything, unless something requires a resolution, and at any point that discussion brings you to a point of decision, then you can make that decision.
It's just something we've done in the past with these kinds of things.
We looked, I think ultimately, I would like to do it for posterity or future generations to have a guide, because we've looked back through all the iterations of how things have changed over the years. We can't find a single resolution adopting a pay plan.
Well, and
there's nothing that says you have to do it that way.
no, but I want to speak to what the personnel committee said we should do. Their recommendation was we adopt a pay plan as council and speak to future councils that way. That this is something that needs to be addressed. That was a big concern of theirs. That's why.
And to be clear, they've adopted pay plans in the past, but they haven't done it by resolution. It hasn't been formal with the documents attached to it and all that. And I think ultimately we get to where we do that, but ahead of that, just, a decision and guidance on what do we do from here can come well in advance of that. Because this is, frankly, the budget as it sits now is as tight as we've ever presented. And it includes none of this. The only thing that's in there are people that are in the current plan due for a step. That's about $22,000 or something like that. That's why we did this comparison that Carol did, where all of that was figured in. We came down with a benefits, what's already in the budget for the staff, all that's been included. Part-time folks are all included, and that's where we come to that little different number than what he had.
Can I ask you a question? Go ahead.
I'm saying, but that number is wanting for funding, and it pretty much in its entirety. Now, we do have $14,000 in new tax, but that's it.
Did you look at the budget again after you saw this to see, what can we do about it to try to not raise taxes or not raise as much taxes?
Yeah, the bottom line is we're really, even in this year's revenue, we have some one-time revenue. Like when we started the capital projects fund, we had to move $300,000 over there for basically seed money because we had to pay for things before we could be reimbursed from grants. All those projects have run their course. Well, that money can come back over to general fund now, but that's a one-time transfer. We've got the $100,000, just over $100,000 from the state grant. That's a one-time thing. We're fine, but we're really looking for things that we can use that one-time money for, that we're not going to get in harm's way trying to use it for recurring costs. That's how tight we are. It's a matter of actually deciding if we're going to cut things out of the budget. I don't think there's any way to rearrange or, even all the major capital stuff is already coming out of fund balance, which is fine. We're still going to be above our minimum levels of fund balance. But we shouldn't be taking operational costs out of fund balance. And that's really, we're very much at that line.
I have a concern about getting something at the last minute and having to increase taxes to pay for it without having the citizens have time to digest it. And I realize they'll have a couple of meetings, but if we have the ability to work this new pay structure into our budget without raising taxes this year, and then plan over the next year on a long-term tax increase to cover, this is gonna have, we're gonna look at this every 2 or 3 years. So we need to plan for that as a long-term thing. That, if we can do that, that would be ideal, is to try to get our budget to work this year and then plan over the course of the next year. To me, that would be ideal.
How would you do that?
I don't know.
That's our choice. That's up to us.
I think that's something that I'm asking Boyd to do.
So
You mentioned some, one-time expenses that are gonna come over here. I'm just wondering, is there a way for us to make it work, to patch it together this year, and then plan over the course of the next year, so we don't tell the taxpayers, hey, we got this report last week and we're gonna raise your taxes. You know, I'm just saying, let's try to plan and work on something over the course of the whole year so that everybody knows what's coming, everybody can plan for it and discuss it, and people will be happier that way and more understanding of what's happening to them if we can do that. I'm not saying we can, I'm asking you to try, I guess.
You can't continue it indefinitely, right? Because we're using one-time things, but
Right. No, I'm not saying
we're
every
buying-
year we're going to pull.
we're buying time.
Rob Peter to pay Paul, but I'm saying that if we can make it work this year and then plan for the next 3 years or 5 years or however many we need to plan for, and maybe that that will probably include a tax increase, but at least we'll have a plan, and the people will know what's going on with their money.
So you're saying figure out how to implement this without a tax increase?
I'm just asking if we can.
I'm asking you if that's
Yes.
what you're saying.
Yes, that's what I am.
So then, next year, we would have to do a tax increase to cover this and whatever the next step in this process is.
Yeah, I mean, yes, we can't, I don't think we can go year to year and say we gotta increase taxes this year to pay for this. I think we need to say, over the course of 3 years, this is what we're gonna have to pay for. So we gotta have tax money to pay for it. To me, we need to plan better. And maybe if we can get by somehow this year, then we can take a year to plan. Hey, yeah,
I think that's a bad plan.
why?
Because we're the, if you want to talk about it in terms of numbers, you say, okay, what we're talking about is 375, it's really 366,000 now that we know we have 14,000 additional coming in taxes. So but the total amount, this 375,000 is what we're talking about, the cost of this package now, is that correct?
Not if you're talking
Does this not account for benefits?
tax,
No, I'm just talking about the cost of the salary plan.
the cost of the whole thing across all funds, yes.
Is $375,000. Okay, so the ways that he or you, or if you were in his position, can account for that out of our budget would be something across the board. Everything gets cut, and then all that stuff that we did. I mean, you got to then go through that again. It's almost like you're back to square one. You do what, and you guys would have to say what it is. You do what can be done out of pulling from your general fund. I don't even know if you can do that. Can you do that? I'm not talking about whether it's a good idea. I'm saying, can you do that?
There's no legal prohibition against using general fund balance for operational costs.
It's just not
It
good.
is extremely poor practice.
Right. So that would be.
Violates all the financial principles.
Right.
Yes. And so that's what I'm saying. If we force those situations, we've already seen what the departmental needs are, unless we go back. And every one of us, as we saw the departmental needs, talked to each one and said, well, we'd like to give them that too. Do you recall that? We got to the end, and we would like to have added things in. Well, that's certainly all that's gone. Plus the stuff that they said they needed just to operate their departments is gone. There is no magic source for this.
Well, that's what I'm asking Boyd to find out. Is there, I mean, you mentioned there's some money that we put over to pay for something that we can put back in. I'm just asking you if you can find
That's
it.
already in the budget.
And that happens automatically. It's like with the LPRF grants.
But also we again, I hate to do one time to pay for recurring, and it is bad, horrible practice, but we're also planning on buying a cherry picker. We're also planning on buying some other things that if we delayed it a year, we buy ourselves time. No,
Those are all being paid for out of fund balance. Delaying those things a year doesn't do anything to free up revenue dollars.
just said you can use fund balance to pay for operational costs.
I mean,
What you're talking about is cutting departmental budgets to pay for operational costs, to pay for payroll. And you can do that too. I mean, we can go through to every department and say what Mike asked for, he's not gonna get it. But these guys are like,
At the same time, I mean, you're talking about this plus future steps, plus adding the needs that we have personnel-wise that we aren't fulfilling right now. You're right, we had several of us, and we all thought, hey, man, all these are great. How high are taxes? How high can we send taxes? Do we want to be well above everybody else in the area? I don't think we can, that's sustainable.
so
We can't, there's a point, we're already the third highest in Hamilton County, other than the city of Chattanooga, which is kind of in a different bucket of its own. I mean, at some point, we're tax-wise a very unfavorable place to live. And part of that's a symptom of just our makeup of revenue. I mean, we can't.
well, that's the nature of being the community that we are.
that's right.
I mean,
Right, people-
almost all of our revenue is property tax. Collegedale, East Ridge, they have a property tax that's a little lower than ours, and they generate millions and millions of dollars in sales tax revenue. We don't have it.
Right, and one of the reasons I was asking him, I think it's fortunate that Steve did Franklin. Franklin reminds me of Signal Mountain in some ways, in that the people who choose to move to Franklin move
Minus
there.
the country music stars.
Minus the
No,
commercial tax revenue.
I'm talking about the people. My daughter moved from Signal Mountain to Franklin. She's not a country music star. She bought a house in subdivision, cost about the same things it did here, because of police services, because of all the kinds of things that make the quality of life great there.
Mhm.
And we have a town where our citizens expect a certain quality of life and a certain level of services, and that comes at a price. We can stop meeting those needs. I mean, we looked at this the last time we had to go through this, and let me finish this thread, because this is an important point. There are ways. One way, we really could start charging people for trash pickup and change the way some of that stuff is gone. You could change the way though that's a separate budget, isn't it?
No, not anymore.
Okay, so, I mean, you could change that, and when you look at, for instance, like Red Bank, and you say, well, our taxes are higher, when you look at, they pay, am I correct? They pay for those things separately. When you factor in the other things that pay for in these other towns, our taxes aren't higher. It's just that we encompass everything. Now, we can break all that out. People aren't gonna be any happier to know all of a sudden now they gotta pay $50 a month for their trash pickup. But that accounts for, let's say we're doing something that's gonna cost a $400,000 home $100 in taxes, which I think I'm close of what this would cost in a tax increase.
Yeah.
I think it's about a $400,000 home, about $100 in taxes. We can cut that in half by charging people $50 for and so that's a way that you can do it within the budget without affecting the departmental budgets. And there are those kinds of things that you do, but every one of them upsets an apple cart somewhere. This is the hard stuff.
But
So
here's
I'm
the
not-
thing, this is why I think time helps the situation I'm with Carol, I cringe at the thought of using non-recurring to pay for recurring, but there is a mismatch in expectations and the reality of the revenue base of our town. We do have the same expectations as the folks from Franklin. But Franklin and a lot of these places we tend to compare ourselves to have up to 50% or more revenue coming from commercial. We don't have that.
I wonder what our tax rate is compared to Franklin though.
And so
It might be lower.
I'm sure
Well, you
we
can't
are.
compare because their assessor's different and they use a different methodology. And
No, but people can compare when they write checks.
Just so we're clear, I'm not suggesting that we can't do a tax increase to cover us in our next budget. I mean, and I'm not suggesting we have to do this. What I was suggesting is, can we patch it together for this budget and work on things like maybe what you're talking about, pay for, whatever these services are, or a tax increase that we can plan on over the next 3 years. That's going to cover us for the next 3 years until we have to adjust this pay scale. So I'm not saying every year we're going to do this, patch it together and never increase our taxes. I'm saying patch it together this year. We should have started planning for this what we got from the salary guy when we hired him, frankly. But
I would like to mention, I've mentioned this at multiple council meetings throughout the year, that this is, so we have the opportunity to prepare for it all the time, but we can't create magic revenue. We have this revenue source.
Okay, and I'm just saying, can we patch it together this year and then plan over the course of the year for how to deal with it long term? That's all I'm asking. I'm not saying that nobody's ever going to get what they want year after year after year because we just aren't going to raise taxes. I'm saying if we can, let's patch it together and plan.
It's going to seem like I'm just arguing with you, and I apologize for that because I know exactly what you're going through. I feel the same thing. I've sat in the same seat, going through the thing. I don't want to raise taxes. Nobody wants that. People are going to be unhappy.
We're going to have to raise
taxes.
But your assumption is that they prefer the services over the taxes.
No,
we're
no.
not asking that question.
No, we're going to have to raise taxes.
Let me finish my point with Charlie. This is a political body. Next year is an election year. The people who are going to run for office next year are going to run on the promise that they will not raise taxes. And that is not good planning. And when Steve was mentioning every 3 years, I was calculating, well, so if you went 3, you'd have an election year, not an election year, an election year, not an election year. And the way it would work out, because it always does, is the loudest voice you're going to hear is people against raising taxes. And somebody who stands up and says, I will not raise your taxes, I promise, that person wins the election. And you drive this situation down and you end up
Then the
really
citizens
below.
are telling you what they want in that situation. They're wanting us to take a hard look at the services we're providing. Instead of, they're telling us your
I mean, I've heard
solution is the one they don't want.
When the school thing was raised, there were a lot of people that said we don't want it. Well, no, actually, it was the grocery store. When the grocery store thing came up, people didn't want the grocery store, and they said, "We're willing to pay more in taxes. We don't want the grocery store. We understand that we're not going to get the sales tax revenue. We're willing to pay for that." Okay, I think people are willing to pay the taxes. I don't think most people would say, "Don't raise my taxes at all." I mean, I'm sure plenty of people will, but I just have the concern of saying, we got this report last week, we're raising your taxes. And that just seems like it's a little unfair for the public. It would be better, in my opinion, if they could have a year to digest it. And then, their taxes are going to be raised.
And to speak in an election, I think you might be wrong about who gets elected in that. If you have some responsible people that are able to explain the situation, they may say, sir, I think almost anybody would say we should be paying our employees what they deserve. We're not even getting there here. Maybe I'm wrong, but I cannot predict.
And again,
the wide body of citizens and
again, I'm asking if this can be done. If it can't be done, then we move on to the next step. I'm just asking if it can be done.
Well, and I'm not seriously not trying to argue. I'm saying how, because that's what it came down to last time was these little petty things. And if you start nitpicking at everything, you could think something like, and I just want to say this for general discussion. I'm not suggesting this right now, but if you say, okay, so that $375,000 with $9 million budget, that's what, 2.5%. I think I'm close on that. I'm guessing. Maybe that's right. But then when you realistically
$9 million budget, $370,000 would be 4%.
4%, thank you. So let's say you might go to 4%, but then when you actually start, so you'd say, well, let's just cut 4%. That's not 1%. Anyway, whatever the percentage is, what you find out when you really start looking at it is Carol's going to go, you can't touch water, you can't touch sanitation, you can't touch state street aid, you can't touch, and you get all these things that you can't touch. Now you get down to maybe $1.5 million, then that starts to become a significant percentage of that. And you're talking about, if you're trying to do that across the board, something major. And then you will find that there were some things that, well, we don't have a choice. We have to do this year. We have to do that. And you're going to get down to, and I remember it was just, you remember this. Somebody said, well, let's cut piano tuning. Okay, well, that's $800. You know, so what are we going to do
I mean,
next?
it really is like that. I'm telling you, what he says is true.
And when you look at just out of the gate, you know, you're talking about a $9 million budget. Just in general fund, 5.2 million of that is salary and benefits.
Yes, you
Which
can.
is exactly what we're trying to work on. So
Right.
That's out.
So that's out to begin
$5
with.
million
I didn't even mention
I mean, I
that.
guess if you're,
I've got to get a drink of water. I'm not.
if you're talking about,
I'll be right back.
you know, $400 a year, $100, what is it, what did we say? $100 a year for a $400,000 house. It's, you know, it's like $8 a month. I mean, I'm not saying that that's nothing, but it's just, life is getting more expensive. I mean, everything is getting more expensive. And
People's
It's-
taxes are naturally going up too. It's not just
they are.
that they get reassessed,
They are. People's property values are also increasing.
yeah.
So,
Yes, some are, but generally, when they're reassessed, that's why we had to drop our tax rate.
yeah.
Because unless your home reappraises well above what the average was, you shouldn't see an impact.
Yes, but they do reassess occasionally, sometimes at a purchase, and increase the assessed value of that property, correct? Or maybe I don't.
No.
None of that.
I do think that they do.
Yeah, they did that to me.
Sale costs if something sells during the year.
That was a while ago.
I don't know.
But it
It's
came,
their worst number,
regardless,
right, does not necessarily impact the assessed value.
Yeah.
if you take out that 14,000 that we were talking about, and that's new construction, the taxes generated by new construction, then you calculate what's left by the new tax rate, it's the exact same revenue that we had last year.
Yeah, I know that's not, it's neutral houses, the reassessment, I'm not talking about reassessment, I'm talking about the normal process that happens, not on reassessment years. And I'm not an expert on that, but the other thing is that just made me think about 14,000. I'm just curious if we know or have any idea as we talk about kind of Charlie's thought is, I see a lot of, I drove around towards Shackleford Ridge, still in town there's a lot of building happening. Is there a significant amount in the following year that we would?
This past year was a boom year for construction. We had a lot, and that was the end result. And that was something
We only get
did.
14,000 extra dollars.
We
No,
don't get
let
that.
me, because you said something a minute ago that, and I just kind of want to put this in perspective. We don't have, we're not going to have commercial growth and an increase in sales tax rate. That's just not going to happen. So our revenue growth is going to be property tax based.
Mhm.
Okay. So if we have an $8 million budget, and year to year, it only goes up 1%. Just the cost of doing business, just as you said, everything costs more. If it only goes up 1%, that's $80,000. Okay? On $8 million, that's just $80,000.
Mhm.
All right?
Yep.
To make that up at our current tax rate, there would have to be $20 million worth of new value added to property in this town.
And our total value was like 800 million, 88 or something like that. I think was the.
So that is, there's no way that's going to happen.
Millionaire estates.
It's, it's,
Yeah, I
it's
know.
just not, it's not possible. So the only way that we can sustain, if we're gonna say, we're gonna keep this level of service and continue to operate the way we are, we're not gonna get any better, we're gonna make sure we didn't get any worse. And that's all we saw was a 1% increase in costs every year. We would theoretically have to raise taxes every year just to do that. So when you have this type of a revenue source,
It's tough.
you really don't have any choice.
There's another thing that needs to be tossed out just because as you're having discussions with people, which you all should, and we will. If the grocery store had gone in, the sales tax revenue from that, does anybody know what it would have been? What it would have added to our budget?
We did some
I vaguely
calculations.
remember
I
it,
don't
yeah.
know.
I mean, let's just be clear, the grocery store people were exaggerating it.
No, that's not, when we did some actual numbers and did it a couple different ways, Boyd, correct me if you remember, I could go back through my records, but.
They were, I think they were quoting the whole county number or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Ours was
Not
gonna
the
end
part
up being
we
like
did.
$125,000. It wasn't. It
Right.
didn't solve this
Yeah.
problem. I mean,
But it,
sure, it would've helped. Would help.
it would have brought more commercial activity around it too. I don't think.
But it
would make
probably
a huge
also would
impact.
have been, we had to add to the police department because it would have required,
Right.
you know, it's.
At the
But
end of the
there's
day, we might have
also-
lost money on the deal.
Geometrically.
You just don't know how it all works.
Unlike, just like Boyd mentioned, unlike the property tax revenue, which is very stagnant over time, year to year, it grows with inflation. It's only 125,000, but
Yeah,
it would grow as their prices in the grocery store increase.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
But at the same time, some of that would have been offset by a loss of revenue from the other stores.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about.
Yeah, true,
calculating
yeah,
that.
there's cannibalization there too.
Yeah.
Okay,
Because
well,
the bottom
we're
line
off track a little
Well,
bit.
well,
Yeah,
well, we're still there just a little bit though, Charlie. I just think you get all this stuff out because these are going to be.
You're right, because you hear that.
These are going to be the things that people say, and you need to understand. Okay, some of this stuff is exaggerated, and so now we're back to property tax. And I agree with you, and I agree with everybody here at the table. It would be better, and I agree with what the personnel committee said when it comes to the to this whole thing that we're talking about. We need to be thinking ahead, but we have I don't want to say crisis because that's what somebody will say, but we have an existential problem for keeping our departments running properly right now. And this is what you sign up for when you do this. I mean, and in a community that gets its funding the way ours does, boy, there's just not an easy answer to it.
All right, well, what I would,
Well, I'm sorry, I have one more thing I want to throw in on that. That'll be helpful. You're not gonna like it. It's been discussed also in the past that when you do get in a situation where, I shouldn't say you won't like it, but it's gonna complicate things. It's been discussed in the past, you know, we recognize that this is a property tax based budget that's gonna happen in this town forever, because that's the way it's gonna work. Sometimes you want to start protecting people at some ends of that property tax increase. This council has the ability to do that. The council can set up things that say people over 80, yours does not get impacted. And that sounds like an easy thing to do with people over 70, but then you got to start looking at sometimes the people over 70, their houses are also owned by other kinds of trusts. That becomes complicated as well, but there are ways that you can lessen the impact on those that
Fixed income.
who are on fixed incomes that could get hurt the worst. But there are entire industries set up to keep wealthy people protected, you know, within that as well. So I'm saying all these things are things that we can think about are complicated, but we don't have a lot of time to do it. So I'm sorry for all that, but I just wanted to get that out.
okay. I mean, obviously, when we talk about the budget next, we're gonna have to figure out a way to pay for the changes in the salary. So that's Saturday, right? So, I would like you to come with, all your ammo, whether it's a patched together budget to get us through so we can plan for the next year, or it's tax increase, or it's some combination or something. Just come with all your ammo and we'll talk about it on Saturday. That's my thought.
Sure.
Anybody else?
Are you suggesting, and I don't think you are we taking care of this?
Taking care of what?
The proposed.
Vicky asked the question earlier, you know, hey, is there a way to take a small chunk today and figure out chunks later? And, you know, I actually talked to MTAS about that, just that they don't do pay plans, but they do help develop implementation plans for a pay plan developed by somebody like Burris Thompson, because they know dealing with revenue constraints and they know how to handle those situations, which is why buying a year again and bringing in MTAS would be potentially a solution. Again, not my stomach is churning doing that, but buy yourself a year and figure out an implementation plan and act on it within the first month. It doesn't have to be done at the end of the year, but whatever step one is, maybe this is something we as a town cannot digest today. I don't know, you know, I don't know.
By today, you mean this meeting, or do you mean this point in time? This year.
This year. I mean, it's $475,000.
375.
Sorry, 375.
360.
Again, the general fund is the only, stormwater and water will be covered by rates. And we've already discussed that. Unless something has changed, those increases are in place, or will be.
So is there something offsetting the 375 for those pieces, or is that already presented here?
Well, their salaries and benefits and all that are paid
Yeah.
for by fees.
Yeah.
So that's something that's dealt with. We're, the 330,692
Is the general?
is
Yeah.
the general fund impact that we need to address.
True.
So,
14,000, that's taken care of.
Minus 14,000.
And, you know, with the time constraints that we have, there can be a dozen different scenarios that we can come up with. Well, we'll do this year, and not this, and that'll be next year. We can't run those scenarios in the next 4 days.
You also can't dictate what future councils do.
That's what concerns me is in the next
I'm not
year,
concerned
we-
about future councils if I mean, to me, that's the voters speaking. Like, I'm not more intelligent than all the voters on Signal Mountain. That's so arrogant of us to sit here and say
That's not
that we should
But you
dictate
have
what
more
the future
responsibility.
councils should be doing.
You have more responsible than any other citizens in this town because you're sitting here. It's not about being smarter. It's about the responsibility that we have, and we have this responsibility as well.
Yes.
And that's part of keeping the town going. So it's, it's just tough. It's a hard position to be in.
Yeah, and sometimes the easiest solution is to raise taxes instead of taking a hard look at some of these bigger questions over a year.
Like what?
Like, if the voters feel like there's services that currently we fund that we shouldn't be, or they don't want, then we should be
Propose one and tell me.
I don't know what that is.
Well, then
We don't have a mechanism.
I think you mentioned
to
having
do
an
that.
MTAS help.
Exactly,
getting their help.
MTAS has the ability to help with these things.
But that's not gonna happen between now and Friday,
Exactly.
Saturday. It's gonna happen after we pass a budget
And
and
we're
planning for the next 3 years.
that doesn't mean those things go away. It means voters take responsibility for funding them. It doesn't, they can still be run through town government, through funding from citizens. That's the way some places and some models do these things.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons people say our taxes are higher and red banks are lower.
Yeah.
But they're not, because they have to pay for the services, and it all works out the same.
I don't know if it works out the same, but
I don't think
It's pretty
anybody
similar.
disagrees the services shouldn't be there, it's just of where, how they get funded.
I can't
I
remember
would
what
say
the,
that I know Red Bank charges their solid waste.
That's what it
fees
is.
as part of their property tax statements that are issued annually. So that will not be reflected as part of their property tax.
It's just
Yeah,
another,
a fee that is part of
Is
their
that optional?
property
Can I
tax.
opt out and say I'll have my solid waste pickup
I
at
shall
Allied?
not use the bathroom while I'm in town.
Oh, no, sorry, I'm thinking of,
I had garbage.
Oh,
yeah, I
garbage,
think
okay.
that's what you meant.
yeah, that's what I was
No, yeah,
I will have no toilets in my house.
I have an outhouse.
Okay, well, anyway,
Whether you like it or not.
that's,
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Let me ask you, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. But I will obviously do what you're asking to do, but any objection to me doing that with this as the target?
Yeah, that's the question I was
And
asking.
then we see where we
I
are.
think that needs to be your target.
Cause I can't just
Yeah,
come up with all these different scenarios and try to, I think this is what you have before you, it's what the personnel committee's looked at. This is our target, see what we can do, and then we have what we have come Saturday morning, and I'm told we have a 4-hour window to solve the problems of the world.
So,
That's right.
is it inappropriate for me, because I'd like to do this, I'm not doing this now, I'm asking, but I would like
Are
to.
you offering to bring breakfast?
No.
Go ahead, sorry.
I would like to move that we accept the personnel committee's recommendation as presented in order to get that on record so that we are moving forward to say that we are going to try to adopt the personnel committee's plan as.
I think we have a responsibility to the employees of the town to do that. I think it's a vote of confidence. I think it is the right thing to do. I don't see, I think everybody's been really patient. I know, specifically our fire and police folks, we're kind of we're training them to leave. It's costing us money. So I think we have a responsibility, and to the town citizens, because of we have people that are doing great jobs, and people are gonna quit, I think. So I would like to do that. And then I would like to go from here to say, how are we gonna meet the requirements that we have to do what's best for the town employees and the town citizens. I think it all goes together.
Can,
Do I have a motion here?
Well, I just wanted to see, I was kind of checking the temperature of everybody.
yeah, I was gonna suggest we make a resolution for either Saturday or Monday.
Okay, yeah,
Would that be all right?
yeah, cool.
I mean, to say this is our target and have it on as a resolution, 'cause I think Boyd wanted a resolution, you wanted something
Yeah, I mean, you
official.
To
could
adopt,
vote on it now, and then we could create a resolution to,
Well, do we have consensus that we want to do a resolution?
Yes.
Yes.
Then we don't have to vote on it. We have
yeah,
consensus.
just put it,
Yeah, we need to.
All right, it's almost 9. These poor folks wanna go home. We'll stay here forever.
I'm hungry.
Everybody wants to stay here forever, but we have the people in the audience.
so fun.
I can't remember how you worded it for me to waive the rest of the business, but if you'll remind me of that, so we can make a motion.
You can just say move to waive the rest of the agenda, but we're supposed to vote on
and
it.
adjourn.
All right, move to suspend the remainder of the agenda. Do we have a
Yes.
motion?
Yeah, I move that no, you have to make, you're the
Oh,
one who has
I have to
be
do
the
it,
chair.
okay. I move then that we suspend the remainder of the agenda.
Oh, second. Wait, go ahead.
Yeah, but,
We're about to
all in
suspend your
favor?
opportunity to speak.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Okay.
this isn't technically an agenda item, so I'm thinking.
Is our meeting adjourned, or?
Yeah.
No, we still have to adjourn.
You have it adjourned?
No, well, is this something you want?
This doesn't have to be, if somebody wants to sue me, they can sue me. I would like to, on Saturday's agenda, to add the first reading for the stormwater fee and the water rate fee, so we can get those cranked.
That's a good idea.
Any objection to that?
No.
No.